Good morning, everyone. It's now 10 o'clock and this hearing session is open. It's a hearing session that forms part of the examination of the Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. My name's Roisin Barrett. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out this independent examination. It's into this document, which is SD01, the submission plan, on the website. So the examination began with the submission of the plan in November of last year and will end with submission of my report to the council. Jill Taylor, sitting to my left here, is the programme officer. She's working independently of the council at my direction. If you've got any queries about the administrative arrangements relating to the examination, please have a word with her. You can catch her in an adjournment, or indeed her contact details are on the website. You've most probably been in contact with her already. A few housekeeping matters. Phones or any electronic devices, please turn to silent. Toilet facilities are on the floor below, on the second floor. We are expecting a fire alarm, aren't we? So if it does sound, we'll just take a break in proceedings. However, if it sounds at any other time, please make your way. It will be a proper fire alarm. The green signs, this door here, if you leave the room by that means and gather in Abbey Gardens. Yes. Is that right? For those of you or anybody in the Wickham room, follow the green signs and make your way out and meet in the same place. Please avoid walking in this area here. That's because there are trip hazards. When we adjourn, if you're charging your laptop and you've got a lead behind you, please can you just bring the lead in so that it's not a trip hazard for those who are walking out of the room. Okay, now I'm assuming that everyone's seen a copy of my guidance note, matters, issues and questions, and the hearing programme that has been amended as the examination has progressed. Now, my role in conducting the examination is to decide whether the local plan has been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 as amended and associated regulations, and whether it meets the tests of soundness as set out in paragraph 35 of the NPPF. Now, I'm going to read those out because I want participants around the table to refer to those when they're telling me why they think the plan is unsound. So first of all, the first test is that it's positively prepared, providing a strategy which as a minimum seeks to meet the area's objectively assessed needs. Justified and appropriate strategy taking into account reasonable alternatives and based on proportionate evidence. Effective, deliverable over the plan period and based on effective joint working on cross-boundary strategic matters. Consistent with national policy, enabling the delivery of sustainable development in accordance with the NPPF and other statements of national policy where relevant. Now, I've read representations and supporting material provided by all parties, council and objectors around the table. So just to say, the hearing session isn't an examination into all objections. It's for me to focus on the things that I really need to hear about. So written materials already being provided to me. We'll take that as read. What I want you to do is expand on that in what we're saying today. It is helpful, however, if particularly as we've got a number of new parties around the table, if you just say who you are, who you're representing and what the nub of your concern is. So my starting point for the examination is the assumption that the council has submitted what it considers to be a legally compliant and sound plan. So that's why I say those who are saying that it's not legally compliant or seeking changes to the plan need to tell me in what way it's not legally compliant or sound. Now, if I if I were to find that the plan is unsound in any way, the council wouldn't be able to adopt it in its present form. It would be amended and adjusted in light of my findings. Now, in terms of this hearing session, it's a structured but informal discussion, as I said, focusing on the particular issues that I feel I need to hear about. Now, just because I'm saying, no, I don't need to hear anything more on that, isn't because I'm dismissing any concerns or anything that's been said in any way. What it means is I've read a wealth of information on most things that have been raised. What it means is, thank you very much. I've listened to what the council said. I've listened to what you've said. I don't need any more help on that matters. I can come to my conclusion on the basis of what I've read. So please, something to remember. Don't think that just because I say no, thank you, I don't need to hear about that, doesn't mean that I'm dismissing that point. Okay. So when we go around the table, what I'll do on each point, I'll spend some time with the council, and the purpose of that is to ensure that I get what I need from the council. Then I will open it up to those around the room. Now, if you want to speak, if you turn your nameplate like that, I'll bring you into discussion at an appropriate time. Please, when you turn it up, can you just make sure that I can see it so that I can read it? Because it's much nicer to, if I can, to refer to somebody rather than, you know, just pointing and saying, okay, you. Now, please don't repeat something that somebody else has already said. If you particularly agree with what's been said before, just say, you know, I've heard what so-and-so said. I completely agree with that. What I would like to add to that, or indeed say, I've heard what so-and-so said. I disagree with that because X, Y, and Z. Far more helpful to me than hearing the same thing over and over again, because I understand the strength of some arguments because I've read all of the wealth of representations already. Okay, is there anything else that we need to say on that? Please use your microphone. That's important because the acoustics sometimes aren't great in this room. Also because we are being recorded, and if one isn't speaking into the microphone, people who are online, and we've gauged it throughout the hearings, quite a few people are online, they can't follow the discussion. So please just make sure that you speak into your microphone. Now, I'm just going to set out my approach to omission sites, because basically I won't be considering them in detail, and I haven't done in any previous session. So those sites that have been put forward by the council and one might object to, you can put your comments to me at that time. If it is the case that I find any of the sites unsound, I'll first of all be looking to the council to put forward additional sites using the methodology that they've set out. And obviously you'll have your opportunity to comment on that at the appropriate time as the examination progresses. Okay, is there any queries? Anything anyone needs to say on the running or anything that's unclear? Okay, let's move on then. Could I just turn to the council? Have we got any outstanding matters that we need to deal with? Any housekeeping matters or anything?
Just a minor matter, Ma'am, is obviously just to point out that obviously we've given. So that's the document we will be referring to, which is on the internet. Yeah. Hopefully that's a consolidation of exactly where we are today, incorporating obviously the addendum. So hopefully that's helpful to everybody.
Well, I'll be using that. I just find it more helpful for hearing sessions to have it in hard copy. So I'll be working from that. Is there anything else? Okay, let's move on now. Is that it, or is it? No, different every week. that it? As soon as I start speaking, it pipes up again, usually. Right, okay then. So we're dealing with, this morning, we're dealing with the chapter dealing with creating a vibrant economy. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to deal with the policies first of all, and then we will move on to the site allocation. So I don't want this session to get muddled up with the details of the site allocations, and I've indicated which site allocations I need to deal with. So if you do have detailed comments on the site allocations, please keep those for the session when we'll specifically be dealing with that allocation. If it's a general point, please make it to me at the when we're dealing with the policy. And I say that in particular, policy E2, which of course deals with the spatial distribution of employment sites and names the allocations in this plan. So let's first deal with, we've got a number of studies that underpin the council's approach to its employment and retail requirement. So that is the employment land study. Yeah, the employment land study, and you've got a revision of that. You've got the both carried out by Lambert Smith, yes, and you've got the employment land study 2024, and then you've got the town centre uses study 2020 and 2024. Now, I don't need to hear everything about that, but basically what those studies do, the plan sets out a need, doesn't it? Sorry, who am I speaking to on this one? Is it Mr. Ayling? Is it?
I'll be the main council witness on this element, but I'll be
the only one nodding.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's good. But also colleagues from Lambert Smith Hampton are here
Great.
to answer on specific points.
Very helpful, thank you. So the employment land study, and what you've got is an approach that sets out a need for between 27.6 and 37.8. Yes, and that's, you might want to update me on that.
Yes, so just on that
Yeah.
point, the plan does have a typo in it, referring to 37.8 hectares as the upper limit identified in the study. The correct figure is actually 38.9 hectares as per main modification. MM45, it's not a difference in the evidence we've got or what we've been looking for. It's a typo brought in from a previous draft of the study, frankly, that's somehow remained in the document, but it doesn't change the position. So there are obviously some other modifications in that MM45, but they relate to the policy itself. So
okay, so it's underpinned, first of all, as I said, the two main studies, the town centre study and the employment land study. Land study deals with B1 to B8, and the town centre study deals with town centre uses, doesn't it? So leisure, retail and that sort of thing. Okay, and commercial. Okay. Now the employment land study basically takes 7 different scenarios that have been developed and then assesses, then you deal with the baseline profile, you test it against stakeholder engagement and wider economic factors. That's another bit, isn't it? And then you come up with what the requirements is. Does anybody want to comment on that, please? I see Mr. Roberts was eager there.
just bring this a bit closer. Thanks, Inspector. Alex Roberts, Lambert Smith Hampton. Yeah, I think your summary is pretty succinct there and covers the main points. And we go into a little bit more detail on pages 4 and 5 of the Council's Matter 16 MIQ response. There's probably just a few more points just to draw out in light of some of the other MIQs received from other parties around the table.
Sorry, would you mind speaking into your microphone?
Sorry, yeah,
I'm
inundated with paperwork, and I'm just trying to.
You what?
Inundated with paper on my do the headset really, I suppose, couldn't I? But yeah, so as I was saying, your succinct summary covers the main points really, and the MIQ response goes into it in a little bit more detail. There are a few other points I'd just draw your attention to, as these cover some of the points made by representatives around the table. And really it's drawing on the stakeholder engagement work, so that's at page 59 of the employment land study. And that picks up the points around Winchester is not a primary location for industrial and logistics, and the types of properties that we see in this district, medium-sized premises, are the most in demand. It also picks up the point around a constrained market and the need for more flexibility in supply, which is then recognised in the outputs from the study. And then also, you mentioned the 7 different scenarios which we go through. Probably pages 110 through to 111, 112 give you some more information and detail on those.
Sorry, what's the reference there?
Pages 110, 111 and 12 of the employment land study. And then finally as well, there was another scenario which was not taken forward in its infancy really, and that's a growth scenario which looks at the LEP-based, as it was then, objectives for growth, and that's set out from page 91 of the employment land study. And the reason why that wasn't taken forward is because the different sectors and the businesses which the LEP was seeking to promote through the various policies and actions that they could utilise aren't really prevalent in Winchester for there to be in effect. So that was discounted quite early on.
Okay. Yeah, and what you say basically is that the methodology that you've used accords with national policy and guidance, and it's one that you've used previously. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah, it's a methodology which we consider to be compliant with the NPPF and the PPG. Similar comments have been made by Lichfield in their matter statements as well. And it's an approach that's been through examination of the local plans and been found sound by those inspectors.
And sorry, give me some detail there.
In terms of the NPPF and yeah, sure. So if you got the so NPPF December 2023 version, chapter 6, which starts on page 24. Some of the key points in there really are around paragraphs 85 and 86, particularly 86, setting out a clear economic vision and strategy, being positively prepared and proactive, having regard to the local industrial strategy. So that's my reference back to the LEP's strategy. Part B, setting criteria and sites. We've looked at what the needs are, and it's for the plan to respond to those with policies. We've looked at barriers for potential investment, so that picks up the stakeholder engagement point and making sure there's flexibility in the supply. And again, that's something that's picked up in part D. And then as well for Winchester, which it's covered in one particular chapter in the report. It's around supporting a prosperous rural economy, and it's recognising the role which more rural located development can have in achieving economic development.
Okay, so the criticism that has come forward on the methodology, there's a number of them, and you've read them. So can I have your response to that? One is the market review and whether that has been integrated into the study. Two is local market signals and how that's been integrated. Have you looked at vacancy rates and that sort of thing, particularly in relation to offices? Could you address those points, please?
Thank you. So I think those points really relate to the office market in general. The work that we did on office market, we looked at the three different econometric forecasts, Cambridge Econometrics, Oxford and Experian, and that showed a different range of forecasts going forward. And to pick up the market signals point, we looked at past completion rates and delivery in the district, and we also engaged with stakeholders.
How did you do the stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, so the stakeholder engagement was, I guess, carried out in two main phases. The first phase was a series of one-to-one interviews that my colleagues undertook early on in the study. And then the second part of that stakeholder engagement was a wider sort of forum, which brought together various interested parties and went through the report with the initial findings and presented a summary of those and took those stakeholders through the process that was taken and invited further comment and discussion through that session.
Okay. And the other criticism that's made is a lack of analysis between market supply and demand by market segments. Could you respond to that, please? And obviously, there's advice on that in the PPG.
If I may, I'll answer that in the first instance. As you're aware from looking at our supply, we have a range of sites, many of which have been delivered and delivering over a number of years in adopted plans. So when we saw the emerging outputs from the LSH study, really it's for the council to consider its supply and how that matches to it, mapping the supply we had against the signals that we had, our upper and lower limit from the LSH work. We then looked at the type of land we had available in our supply and where it is. The hearing statement sets out on table under paragraph 1.18, if you like, how we match the type of need against the type of floor space and type of land available for each of the identified needs. We are more specific in the case of offices, frankly arising from the nature of the type of developments and places that are in our supply. So in other words, they fall out of natural fit and what we anticipate would be deliverable on the sites identified specifically for offices. Where we don't have that requirement, then in line with the messages from the LSH study, we are more open in terms of general employment land, and that fits with what we're being told and what we recognise as well in the need for more flexible units of mixed B2, B8, and with a bit of offices as well. So we think in terms of matching the type, we do think with them, we think we're pretty much in a hair's breadth without even looking at windfall as set out in the study. In my hearing statement. With regards to location, I think in the sub areas, we also had to look at this. We do see that there, certainly with regards to the B2 to B8, we're conscious that a large section of our supply is in the West of Waterlooville, the Newlands development, that has delivered and is continuing to deliver. So we think there's not an issue with that, the delivery of that, but we'll come on back to that, I'm sure. But we are conscious there are other sites that are allocated for that use in the northern part of the district, really looking at Sun Lane, for instance, that is, we could go on to the delivery of it there, but that we're there now in terms of that being in a position to deliver alongside the Winnall site, which although we would not expect it necessarily to deliver an increase in the total level, is available for redevelopment.
Right.
So the Windmill is the employment area under W6.
No, of course. But what are you referring to there?
What I'm saying is there's a large area there that has been subject to a constant stream of applications for change of use, redevelopment and reconfiguring, many of which are still for B uses. And so that will be land that is available to meet modern business users and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay.
So we think we've got a reasonable distribution of sites as well, bearing in mind that the figures and the tables we have necessarily reconciled back to the need does not include an element of windfall, because we haven't attempted to quantify that, although we do have strong evidence that that's an ongoing part of our supply in addition to the figures you see here.
Okay, so what that study gives us, and you've moved on to it, is the table at table C, isn't it, on page 264, and I think you repeat it in your statement. So that gives the lower range, and that's past trends, isn't it? Completions past trend.
Hit me again. Yeah, so the past trend, that is the very lowest for the for the office space. But that's a particular point that's picked up on there.
Yeah, and so you've got the past trends, that gives a figure for offices, industrial warehousing, and then the total.
Yeah.
And then you've got the jobs growth scenario.
Yep.
Yes, which is, and you've taken the midpoint of the three. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so that's one of the points.
Econometric.
Yeah, I don't like saying that either. So that's, as I said, set out on pages 110 and 111 of the employment land study, which goes into the explanation as to why we felt that was appropriate for Winchester. And just picking up again that we've got the working from home sensitivity scenarios in there as well, which in general sees somewhere around 4 hectares removed from the baseline sort of forecast to the working from home one, and that's applicable really to the traditional, the old B1A, B and C use classes. There's no impact on B2, B8. So again, it's one of these market signals which is showing that there's less demand for office space to still provide the same number of jobs.
Yeah, so you've got that, and then you've got the supply. Okay, and there is an MM there as well, isn't there, on the supply? For offices, it said 17.29, and it's actually 13.29.
Yes, it's really to do with a change in what we're saying about certain business parks like SH4. So we'll come to it, but it's all consequential changes from that
business park. I get that. So okay, so 17.29, but what you're suggesting now is 13.29, and what you say is that you've got the range. Past trends 3.3. So if we look at offices, past trends 3.3. The mid-range of the 3 econometric scenarios is 12.2. That's quite a range, isn't it?
It is. If I can give my answer first,
yes, please.
Alex may listen with some further detail. We're very much struck by this, frankly, as the study was coming through.
Yeah.
A wide range of projections on this demand, coming from the 3 main econometric models. We expanded the scope of the study to include all 3. You don't need to have all 3, but we thought, well, we don't want other numbers floating. We want to know what all those projections are, and to try and mitigate some of the risk that the outcomes, frankly, are a little different, because we don't have all the evidence in front of us for Winchester. But the variation is quite striking in offices. We think we've done our best by taking the average of that. But at that point, then we started to talk very much about an upper and lower range of needs as being the way we would seek the advice from LSH to be framed and how we would seek to look at it in the plan. So that was, if you like, how that came about. We can get on to what that means for policy now or in a minute, if you like.
Well, okay. Okay, please keep that point, will you? Because we do need to come back to that. So what it for industrial and warehousing, it's lower range 24.3 past completions, and then you're suggesting the upper range 26.7. So
they're quite similar, yeah.
Exactly. So, and then in terms of supply, what you're saying is 13.29 and Solent Business Park, etc. For offices, of course, you've got a very small supply coming forward for traditional B2 to B8, and then you can say you've got the supply with no prescription, haven't you? What the nub of it is, what you're saying is that fulfills the need.
Yes, we think that land, we do. We think that land's available for those uses, and it is consistent with our experience of what has come through. Comes to mind particularly at Newlands, west of Waterlooville. You know, the sort of units that are described in the Employment Land Study Report are the sort of units we are continuing to receive applications for at West of Waterlooville. They're only coming forward. They have only come forward really in response to demand. They're not speculatively built, but they are very much the sort of flexible mid-size units that the report describes as being really the market for what is needed in Winchester.
And then, of course, what you're saying in terms of the strategy. So you've got the no particular prescription a land coming forward. Then you've got Windfall. Then you've got farm diversification E10, economic development in rural areas, and then you've got visitor accommodation. That's E11, isn't it? Is that it? Have I understood that correctly? That's
you have. I would just like to emphasise E9, which we do think is a change from our current adopted development plan in terms of it specifically allows for further additional employment sites to come forward with reference to local need. So that is a shift, if you like, that should increase the level of windfall we receive and provides us with some comfort with regards to this balance of need and supply and demand in certain parts of the plan area.
okay. Okay. Is there anything else that the council wishes to say, or Lambert Smith, Hampton? I always forget Hampton. Is there anything else?
No, that's all. Thanks.
Okay. Can we move on to the town centre uses study? Understood that. I've looked at that, and what you say is that again it accords with national policy and guidance. You've carried these out before, etc. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. It's a combination of the two 2020 and 2024 studies. Obviously, slightly different emphasis within the two, but the basis from the 2020 in terms of capacity assessment updated in the 2024 to reflect the changing circumstances, and consistent with what we are finding everywhere is sort of decreasing demand for retail floor space. Not a big surprise. And also, obviously, the qualitative side with the health checks updated so that we've looked at both the quantitative demand and the qualitative supply and how the town centres are performing.
Okay, now the first study was carried out in 2020. Obviously, the big concern there is the impact of COVID in terms of what you've said, behavioural changes and structural changes within the industry. Can you talk? Can you tell me how you have addressed that point?
The the analysis in terms of the original market shares would have come from the household survey, and that allowance that looks at how people are currently shopping. When we're looking at assessments for these sorts of studies, obviously we are not interested in online trading, which is the key, I suppose, change as a result of COVID. So the analysis always takes that percentage of spend away from our numbers. When we update, we will look at the latest evidence for online spend and make that adjustment. That assumes no other major change in shopping behaviour. Other than that, that will be looked at in terms of whether there have, we will have looked at whether there'd been any significant changes in provision, but that wasn't the case. So there is no reason to expect those people who are still using sort of physical shops will have changed significantly from what they did previously. But our forecasts allow for that increase in special forms of trading, using new assumptions as well on how existing businesses are performing in terms of how much growth they could expect. That also comes into the revised figures. So as a result of increasing costs, to be successful, businesses are expected to, existing businesses have to, in effect, increase their turnover, returns per square foot. So again, that is what leads to a decrease in available spend to support new floor space, and will be one of the reasons why there is a decline between the 2020 and 2024 studies.
And the recommendations of the 2024 study?
The analysis came up with a relatively small capacity, very small when you compare it with the vacant space that is already available.
Yeah,
it's accepted that not all of that would be necessarily suitable for retail uses going forward, but we're talking, there's the figure we refer to is the sort of, there's all at the time there was more than 7,000 square meters of vacant space in Winchester alone. There is more than enough to meet the need through the reoccupation of that. Allowances are already made for floor space coming through from commitments, and there is obviously the recent change, or relatively recent change in terms of these studies, with the introduction of Class E, where there is a lot of flexibility. And I think what that means is that any floor space in Class E, if the demand is there for retail, there is the option for that to come forward as retail. If the demand isn't for retail, it may come forward for other Class E uses.
Yeah, we've strayed into territory of policy E3, which I was going to deal with in detail. So maybe could we just, I did ask you about that, but can we save some of that when we get on to town centres? Right, could I just turn to the room, please? Would anybody like to, you've heard what the council said, would anybody like to comment on that? Mr. I'm so sorry, I can't read your name. Mr. Gleave, is it?
Yes,
Mr.
David Gleave, City
Yes,
of Winchester Trust, part of the Bushfield group. It's a question, ma'am, of clarification. I've got some comments on the policy element of the employment land use studies, specifically in relation to W5. Shall I defer that until we come on to W5?
Say what you're going to, no, thank you for that. Say what you want to say and then I'll tell you.
Okay, so it's probably going to be a couple of slides, if that's okay, because it's all integrated.
I'm sorry?
It will be a couple of slides of notes. Okay?
Right, okay. I'll stop you if it's something more appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our contention is that W5 is unsound because it's not justified by the need for additional floor space and unsustainable because it's needed to replace office floor space lost in the town centre to other uses.
Sorry, could we? Could we please deal with this under W5?
Yes.
It is very specific. Thank you for just starting on that. Okay. Is there anything else that anyone wishes to say? Could I turn to Three Maids, please? Lily?
Yeah, Laura Cornborough, representing Three Maids Property. Mr. Aylings talked about the plan having flexibility for B2, B8 uses, but this is on mid-size units, and that's based on take-up data, which is constrained by current policies. So our concern is that the plan doesn't provide sufficient flexibility in terms of the types of sites that are allocated, particularly for logistics use, in terms of the locations that those allocations are in. The NPPF requires plans to be flexible enough to accommodate needs not anticipated in the plan, allow for new and flexible working practices, and to enable a rapid response to changes in economic circumstances. And we don't feel that the plan achieves that, particularly for B2.
What policy are you referring to?
The main employment policy.
So E1.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on to that.
Okay.
That, to be honest, that takes us nicely onto that. If nobody's got, I don't have any other questions on methodology. Thank you. Okay, we'll keep that point. Let's move on to policy E1. And basically, what that policy does, it sets out the council's economic strategy to meet the employment needs, and we've heard what those employment needs are. So what that does, it sets out a strategy. It highlights the council's carbon neutrality action plan, the green economic development strategy, and then sets out a strategy to meet the 39 hectares, doesn't it? And that's basically retention of appropriate premises, supporting new development consistent with the spatial strategy, and then allocations, isn't it? Then it specifically deals with the contribution of the local economy for employment opportunities outside industrial class uses. It refers to the rural economy. It gives specific reference to small business startups, to innovation and working from home and self-employment, and then says that in terms of enhancement of skills, you'll be looking for skills plans in relation to the usual plans that you get in relation to the local upskilling local labour. Is that right? Is there anything else that you want to, or anything I've misunderstood about that, please?
Thank you, ma'am. Joan Ashton for this part on behalf of the council. No, that's quite an accurate summary of the policy.
So that's the overall strategy, isn't it? So okay. So we've had this concern from people around the table that it doesn't provide specific support for redevelopment of existing employment sites. Could you just address that point? It's really about that being a source of additional provision. I mean, what you say is that it's unlikely to have a meaningful contribution, but please can you explain that to me?
Yes. Most of the, I need to be close to the microphone. Most of the redevelopment of existing sites for reconfigured employment uses tend to be as a result of modernisation and modern business requirements, and don't really provide huge quantities of additional floor space. And we feel that the policy does refers to the
refurbishment and modernisation of sites and premises and intensification of PDL. Is that what you're referring to?
Yep, excuse me.
In the second para, when you're setting out the strategy for attention of appropriate sites, supporting new development, retention, regeneration and refurbishment and modernisation of sites and premises. Yeah, okay, I get it. Okay, what about activities outside traditional office and industrial sectors? And we've heard about that quite a lot. How are you supporting that? You may want to refer to the third paragraph there.
Yes, certainly. As has been mentioned by a few of our representatives, there are components to the general economy of Winchester district that are outside of the traditional employment classes, outside of office and the B classes. And the policy recognises this, particularly in the third paragraph of the policy. A couple of examples are specifically highlighted, which is education, creative sectors, visitor and tourism economy are specifically mentioned there. Some of the objectors have also suggested that we should expand on that list, but we don't feel it's necessary to refer to all of the possible wider activities that contribute to the economy in the policy.
Okay, you say that they're supported elsewhere. Can you point me towards that? Particularly education, health. Those, I mean, W10, of course, but
yes. Obviously, W10 is well, that intersects with both of those because that's allocation that is around the sites of Winchester County Hospital and the University of Winchester campus as well. So that's specifically for the academic sort of institution.
And W10 sets out support for.
Yes, my colleague knows a few more details about that if you want to talk about the particular site later. Yeah. We haven't the education, the higher education institutions haven't put forward proposals for new additional sites, so we are just being flexible in how we deal with the existing campuses at the moment. Again, my colleague has engaged with those and can talk a bit more about that. However, we have recognised, although the site allocations under the Vibrant Economy chapter do focus to some degree on the traditional uses, we also have a lot of mixed use allocations. And some of those are quite specific, particularly in central Winchester, for example, where we do allow for and we make provision for a wider range of uses that will benefit the local economy.
Okay.
And we do have specific policy in the plan excuse me, my colleague might be able to help me here. Is it in the housing chapter, we have policy about houses in multiple occupation and how we will deal with purpose-built student accommodation. Yeah. So we have policies to deal with those.
Yeah, H9. Yep.
And a lot of the proposals that may involve health or education facilities, for example, do come forward on an ad hoc basis. And this policy E1 allows for us to consider those when they come forward. We appreciate it's not, these uses are not covered specifically by some of the other specific traditional policies of the plan that we'll come on to later, namely E5 and E6. However, although some objectors have said that those policies are unduly restrictive in terms of the uses, this is where the wider policy E1 and all other policies of the plan that talk about appropriate sort of the wider health benefits for the community will come in.
Understand where you're coming from. Okay, I just one other point on this. We've got comments from National Highways. Obviously, as a statute consultee, I'm going to attach significant weight to those comments. Those comments basically said that any application for significant employment or residential or new existing sites should include assessment of the impact on the strategic road network. Now, you're not taking that forward. Could you explain to me why?
Yes, I'll answer that in the first instance. Thank you. Our understanding is that representation came from National Highways at a particular place in time, was where we were at with considering the impacts of Bushfield Camp. And so they had picked up on some of the wording that was used in the Reg 18 plan and in the material, the discussions with National Highways associated with that had caused them to sort of come back and reaffirm that should be the case. I mean, we certainly think that should be the case. It stands to reason if significant development has a potential to impact upon the strategic road network, that work needs to be done. But it felt and looked like a legacy of some previous discussions and not relevant to where the parties were at on that issue now. So it didn't need that specific wording in it. And that's why we've reached the conclusion we have, that it's not necessary.
Have they withdrawn that comment, or?
They have not withdrawn it, but they have not objected to the Reg 19 plan on the basis of what you see.
When was that comment made? When was that comment made?
I will have to double check. No, I can.
Sorry, at what stage?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, Reg 18.
Yeah. Just to add to that, you've probably seen it, Ma'am. There's a statement of common ground with National Highways, and like I say, they haven't raised that issue in that statement of common ground.
No, okay. Yeah, I've seen the statement of common ground. So that comment was made at Reg 18 stage.
Yes.
And was what you're saying to me is it was superseded by events, and I have seen the statement of common ground. Mr. Fraser.
I was just going to say, Mum, just going back to one previous exchange, we were talking about other uses. Reference was made to policy W10. W11 is the policy in relation to the university.
Okay.
Just...
Yes. Okay. I don't have any other questions on that. Could I turn around the table, please? Sorry, you're moving it around. Mr. Gegg.
I'm terribly sorry. Just in relation to the last comments that suggested that this was a historic concern by National Highways, it is worth pointing out that National Highways have sent a letter recently to the Planning Authority in relation to the outstanding proposals for Bushfields Camp, saying that they haven't heard from the developers for some time and that they are unable to reach any agreement about the impact that development will have on the National Highway. So it's not my perspective that this is a dead issue. They are unable to agree anything with the developers, and they have postponed any further letter until August the 18th. So they've
into that site.
In relation to that site, so they are, and that is by far the biggest impact on the road network in any of the proposals in the local plan. Okay. So it would be misleading to give you the impression that this is a dead issue.
No, I understand that, and we'll deal with that and how the policy requirements might deal with that when we deal with W8. Okay, I don't have any further. Is there anything else that you would like to say on that, on policy E1? I actually have one question that I didn't ask in terms of methodology. Now, obviously, the housing evidence base relates to 2020. Your employment land evidence base, when does that relate to?
The needs run from 2023.
Right. tell me about that. Well, explain that.
So obviously there was the past projections, sorry, the lower range is based on previous trends in part, and those are based on
sorry, I just want to go back to my note there. Yeah.
So the lower range is based upon previous trends, which run for a 10-year period prior to 2022. But I think we ran the results from 23 the needs. So in effect, and I know you're thinking about the plan period in other respects, there would need to be some consequential updating of the plan. We could do some consequential updating of the plan to bring it in line with any change in the plan period you've received. Really, what we're talking about here is the AMR, which is in the evidence base. Forgive me, I don't have the numbers hand, but the 23-24 outlines the delivery of an additional parcel at the Newlands, West Waterville, one of those mixed B2, B8 units we're talking about. So that would result in that is part of the 15.25 hectares of supply we've got there. That's how that's. So there would be, we could update it in light of that. So the needs you see, the 38.9 hectares upper limit is from 23 to 2040.
23 to 2040.
Sorry, 2023 to 2040.
Yeah. No, I've got that. Okay, and sorry, so why does it run from the housing evidence base? And I don't want to go over all of that, but obviously that runs from 2020, and your employment runs from 2023 to 2040, as you just said.
I think it's about the timing that the LSH study was undertaken. So we based that upon the most recent trends information we had available at that time. They started in 22. So by the time that study came back, was starting to be usable, had some bones on it, it was based on a 2023 start date. That was where we were at. The original employment study, or the first work, what did have a 2020 base date? I should say that's the 2020 date for that first study we had. But this review, we just ran it from 2023, which was the most up-to-date figures we had available at that time.
Okay. Does anybody else want to say anything on that? Okay.
So just on that as well, Inspector, I think we felt like to use the most up-to-date positions because obviously it takes into account more recent data from the COVID-19 pandemic and more up-to-date data sets and forecasting, which Mr. Ayling's referenced there, rather than relying on a position which was a number of years old when we knew things had changed quite a lot.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, anything else on E1? Let's move on to E2. I want to deal with this in general terms. That sets out the spatial strategy of economic growth for each sub-area, and we've spoken about it. So Winchester Town Centre, South Hampshire urban area, market towns and rural areas, and sets out what is supported within settlements. Basically the growth and maintenance of existing employment within key settlements, and then sets out what should happen outside settlement boundaries, doesn't it? That's basically it. Just reassure me about accordance with SP2. That's the spatial strategy.
Yeah, sorry.
Please.
We think, as set out in the hearing statement, we think that if you look at SP2, which sets out I won't quite call it a mini vision, but it's a pen portrait of what we're trying to achieve in each of those three sub areas of the plan. And as set out in the hearing statement, we think that we can demonstrate quite a close read across between the type of places and future we envisage for each of the three sub areas and the type of allocations that are in each of the sub areas as set out in E2. You know, with the strong link for the South Hampshire urban areas to that wider South Hampshire economy, and links to the strategic road network, resulting in some larger scale allocations. Winchester Town being a focus for growth, but particularly with relation to the type of employment and the type of economic activity we think is Winchester's strength. And finally, the market towns and rural areas, which is by nature got quite a variety of types of settlements in it, some quite large, some smaller, but the two largest market towns do have an allocation each in them, in line with their status, and an ongoing process of rural diversification, everything else that's set out in that market towns and rural areas area. So we think that we have a reasonable match.
Okay. In terms of those policies that we've just been through, you've got a number of MMs. You don't need to tell me about the first one, which is the accounting, the typo that we spoke about, Mr. Ayling, do we? Are there any other ones? I don't think so on E1. On E2?
There is one on E2, sorry, in the wording of the policy, which relates to proposals in the market town and rural areas. If I could just introduce that.
Yes, please. So basically,
this is MM46.
Existing employment sites.
Yes. We made modifications to clarify the approach there, and you'll see the rest of that paragraph actually refers back to to SP2 for further guidance on how to interpret that appropriately. Because as my colleague pointed out, there are a variety of settlements in the rural areas, some of which are quite large and some of which are much smaller.
Okay, so can you just tell me, so you've changed appropriate growth, and it was made appropriate growth and maintenance of existing employment sites, and you've changed it to appropriate growth and retention of land for employment?
Yes, within the settlements, we've said will be supported in accordance.
Why? What's the reason for that?
It's just setting out our general approach to being supportive of maintenance of existing employment in rural areas where they're within settlements.
And does that relate, are you saying the reason for it is because it picks up on the wording in SP2?
It does to some extent, because yes, it does, because SP2 sets out some principles, including where and that the development should be appropriate in terms of the scale that's being proposed in relation to the size of the settlement in which it's located, which is quite important in the rural areas, because we do, as colleagues said, we have quite a variety.
Take out key settlement.
That's why we took out the reference to key settlements.
Okay. Does anybody else want to add anything to that? No? Sorry, I just saw you nodding then, Mr. Okay. Let's move on then. Does anybody else wish to say anything on that? Let's move on to policy E3. Now, this is the strategic policy that deals with town centres, and this is where we started straying into this territory when we were speaking about the town centre use study, the 2020 and the 2024. So those, as Ms. Reeves told us, those studies came up with a number of recommendations. They came up with recommendations in terms of the hierarchy, which I'm cutting to the chase here. Said that the town centre hierarchy was appropriate. The 24 study reviews local centres and says that yes, subject to a reassessment when the impacts of large residential development sites are known. So those are the big ones within Winchester that we're talking about.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, I understand that point. And in terms of existing boundaries, again, defined boundaries are appropriate, but then it makes a recommendation in terms of primary shopping areas, doesn't it?
Yes, to bring it up to date with the
definitions. Effectively amalgamate secondary and primary, brings them together. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Right.
If it's appropriate, Ma'am, there are a couple of modifications in relation to this policy. It might be a good idea to mention them now.
Okay. Do that. This is policy E3.
Yes. Particularly because there are some, we're just proposing some consequential changes to the policy maps to reflect the redrawing and to bring into primary shopping areas instead of primary shopping frontages. So we are proposing a few modifications to that.
Okay.
And in Winchester, that will be more noticeable because the primary shopping area will comprise what was primary shopping frontage and also what was the secondary shopping frontage within a primary shopping area. Now,
okay.
None of the other settlements had secondary shopping frontages, so it was not an issue. That is in the modifications really in relation to the, you've got a separate table about the policies maps, I believe.
Sorry. No, sorry. What you're talking about is consequential changes to the policy map as a result of changes. Aren't those in relation to E7 or?
They relate to E3 and.
Okay, I understand. Okay.
There is another one, which you referred about the retail requirements. Unfortunately, there was quite a large sort of graphical error in the publication of version of the plan, which is now being corrected.
And that's been corrected.
So the table at 10.54 appropriately sets out the findings of the study in relation to convenience and comparison figures.
That's right. And what we have from those studies is, as you said, Ms. Reeves, they're small requirements, and what you're saying is that those can be accommodated for through minor changes to floor space, changes of use within the class, and vacancy. Is that right? And small scale class C in mixed use developments. Is that right? Have I got that? I don't want to labour that because I don't have any further questions on that. The one question that I do have is that study, how did it deal with leisure, the leisure sector?
We looked at the increase in spend that is forecast for leisure, specific and concentrated on the food and beverage increase spend, which is the sort of largest element. We then looked at both the supply and sort of demand for space in the Winchester area, and the general trends that we're seeing in the leisure sector. And what comes out of that overall is that there is a lot of sort of leisure activities that are coming forward. There is a lot less certainty in terms of how that will sort of materialise. Even in sort of food and beverage, increasing demand for home deliveries will eat into that. It's very clear. And therefore, our advice was that we didn't consider it was appropriate to allocate a specific site to meet leisure needs, because it's not clear what those leisure needs will be. It's such a dynamic sector at the moment, but the use, and a lot of those uses will be Class C anyway, so that comes in. So our advice was that the policies already being talked about in terms of mixed use development being encouraged in town centres would be where that sort of need could be met as it emerged. And otherwise it will come through in terms of planning applications, but there is no clear need that we can say there is a need for X, square meters of space for this use that needs to be allocated.
And you're referring to the large Winchester town?
Yes,
allocations.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand that. Can I just deal? So we all know about the uncertainties in forecasting in relation to town centre uses. So 10 years. We know about the particular problems after 5 years. How has that been reflected? How have you taken that into account?
Well, the analysis has looked at a number of years. We did predictions for sort of, in a lot of cases, sort of almost 2 year periods in our figures. But looking at the trends, I mean, they are generally consistent across the period. It's declining demand in terms of retail floor space. So I think in this case, it doesn't, although they become less certain at the moment, the evidence is that there won't be a particularly significant change over the longer period. But obviously that is something that would need to be kept under review by the council.
Okay. And so the findings that the results of that study give us the findings that we've just spoken about and have been corrected by an for Convenience and Comparisons Group. So we've spoken about vacant floor space, 7,000 square metres gross in Winchester, and that's been accounted for in the strategy, and we've just gone through the strategy, haven't we? Now, in terms of flexibility, how has it dealt with that? I don't mind who answers. I know that there's flexibility in the policy because you're not prescriptive about uses, but can you just explain that to me, because there is concern around the table on that point.
Yes, Mum. We have allowed for the policy is a strategic policy, and so sets out the strategy. And our aim with town centres is always to maintain and enhance their vitality and viability.
Yeah.
And as a reflection of changing function of town centres, which has been a trend before the pandemic and certainly continued afterwards, and the introduction of Class E, which allows for changing of use away from retail without planning permission in quite a few circumstances. And also a reflection of trends, particularly within Winchester itself, but also in other towns within the district, of an increase in train toward food and beverage provision, and a decrease in the amount of retail floor space. Our policy is therefore to be more flexible in terms of the types of uses that will be supported within town centres. There are conflicts also between the main town uses as described in the NPPF and use class E and other use classes. So that's another reason why it's not always helpful to prescribe particular uses within the policy.
Okay, so you've taken that approach, haven't you? What you've done is you've set out what the requirement is to enhance the B&B of the town centre, and you've set out that development that provides a service for visitors, public, etc., and where they should be, haven't you?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, but the overall is setting out the requirements to enhance V&V, isn't it? In that policy. So
Yes.
What you're saying is that's how you've reflected flexibility. Is that right? Have I understood that?
Yes, that's right. We do have more specific guidance on town centres themselves within policy E7, and the slight variance with primary shopping areas, which is particularly relevant for Winchester Town, but we'll come on to that later.
Okay. Does anybody have anything to add to that? Okay, let's move on. We've got our next policy is dealing with main town centre uses out of centre, and what that does is basically it applies the sequential test to developments on the edge of town centres, doesn't it? And then it applies a threshold of 350 square metres, and that's to support local facilities and services outside defined centres. Can you just explain to me what underpins that threshold? It's a threshold that is below the, it's quite a low threshold. What underpins that, please?
It's the outcome of reviewing the type of offer that there is in the centres and the size of units within Winchester's town district.
Can you give me a reference there where you deal with that?
It's in the original 2020
study. If you could just give me a
just get
my. Okay, can I leave that with you?
Yes.
And can you give me that reference? Maybe somebody else can be searching for that. In terms of that policy, does it provide appropriate provision for small-scale retail and leisure developments?
Yes.
Which provide a local facility. Could you just explain that to me, please? It's my second question.
Right. Well, the 350 was taken because what we're trying to do, I suppose.
Oh, this is the threshold. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the two figures sort of similar in that obviously our experience shows that there is quite a lot of demand for variation of conditions and changes of use, and therefore the cumulative effect of those is the concern. And therefore, that's why we recommended a relatively low threshold. On the understanding, as is sort of reflected in the local plan, that any impact assessment should be proportionate. So if you're just over the 350, then you're not asking, it wouldn't be appropriate to ask for a very detailed, very large scale impact assessment. But it allows that balance. But at the same time, the local facilities, which are likely to be smaller, wouldn't be subject to that impact assessment.
Could you give me the reference? Have you got the reference there in the town centre study?
Mum, I found the reference for the impact threshold.
Yeah.
In 2020 study, it's paragraph 9.17 onwards.
Thank you.
And reflects concerns. It talks about the cumulative effect of incremental changes that may have on smaller centres.
Does anybody else wish to raise any matters with regard to the sequential test and policy E4? I'm going to move on in the interest of time. Let's move on, taking things a little bit out of order, but let's move on to E7 and E8 because those are related and we don't have to retrace our steps. And those deal with maintaining the V&V, vitality and viability of town centres. What E7 does, it supports the retention of existing retail and other town centre uses and resists loss to others where possible, doesn't it? So it basically is a supportive policy for maintaining the V&V of town centres. It basically sets out assessment for justification of loss. Now, you've got some MMs in relation to this policy, and they're quite important to frame any discussion. Does somebody want to introduce those to me?
Yes, Mark. There's minor modification reference. It's MM 48, yes, about E7, amending the final two paragraphs. Yeah. To provide more clarity, so it's basically rewriting it slightly so that it is a bit more clear about what the requirements will be for proposals within primary shopping areas. Yeah.
Okay. And what's the justification for that?
Sorry, for the modification or for the purpose of that part of the policy?
Well, so you've changed it. It's a change from the submitted plan. Could you just explain that to me?
Right. Okay. Well, actually, this was again reflects back to the studies that Lambert Smith Hampton have done, and particularly the 2024 study.
Yeah.
Because we previously had threshold policies related to percentages in retail use within primary shopping frontages, and of course primary shopping frontages are no longer appropriate, and the difference between retail use and Class E use has now disappeared. So we asked Lambert Smith Hampton to look at those sort of the implications of our current policy and in the extant plan, and how that could translate, and whether it was appropriate to translate going forward. And part of their policy recommendation at the end of their study does consider this in some detail. They suggested some possible policy wording, which we have incorporated into policy.
Okay, so this implements the findings of the 2024 study that we spoke about. Is that right?
Yes, that's
okay.
Largely correct. And what it is trying to sort of produce advice and policy for uses maybe outside Class E, but which would be appropriate town centre uses, and how you sort of ensure that you get uses that contribute to the vitality and viability of the centre.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously, this is where you're talking about consequential changes that have to take place to the policies map. Okay. Just, I don't want to deal with viability here, but you make a point in your statement about viability testing and the viability assessment. How you in relation to testing the requirements of policy E7, and that wasn't addressed in the viability assessment. Can somebody explain that to me, please? Or is that something that I need to raise in our viability?
I think when you discuss the viability appraisal, you'll be talking about the appraisal of the whole plan and go into those sort of details there. But to some extent, this is specific about on a case-by-case basis as well, irrespective of the general findings of viability.
I'll put this point at the viability session. I think that's going to be more helpful. Okay. Let's move on to policy E8 that deals with local shop services and facilities. Basically what that policy does, it supports new, extended and improved facilities outside main town centres, and directing them in accordance with the spatial strategy, basically directing town centre uses to the town centre in accordance with E3. Is that right?
Yes, but as you pointed out in your MIQs, there's potential for some confusion, particularly regarding town centre uses that still may be appropriate if they film a local function. And we have therefore proposed a modification in respect of that, which is that's MM49 in the supporting text. The original text did say that shops, pubs, arts and cultural facilities are town centre uses, which is correct in terms of the NPF and Class E, but as we've already discussed in relation to policies E3 and E7, and indeed E4, there's a potential for some of these uses to be appropriate if they serve a local facility and service. So therefore, we've tried to clarify that by saying that where these types of uses serve more than a local catchment or attract visitors from a wider area, it should be located in regard to the town centre hierarchy.
Okay, I understand that. Does anybody have any comment on E7 or E8? Okay, let's move on, please. Let's deal with, I don't have, we've got policy E9 dealing with economic development in rural areas. And effectively what that policy says is development must not have an adverse impact on the rural character, and then that's the main assessment criteria, isn't it?
Yes, I mean we do take a quite we place high importance on the rural character and natural environment of the district, and so that is kind of the lens in for which we review these. As you'll see, we're seeking reuse of existing buildings in the first instance, and then extensions and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
However, as my colleague pointed out, that was the approach taken in the extant plan. We have taken the approach to be slightly more flexible in terms of supporting new uses in exceptional circumstances where they can be demonstrated to.
And that's in the third paragraph of that.
Yeah. Yes, for local needs.
It's not the third paragraph, I'm looking at the second page.
Yes, that's correct.
Proposals for new industrial commercial development outside settlement boundaries that do not fall within the above will not usually be permitted, however, exceptionally. And then it's a criteria.
Yes, and so applicants would need to demonstrate that.
I've got that.
And the location of those in relation to settlements is quite important in terms of active travel and sustainability. So that ties in with other aspects of the plan as well, and the overall spatial strategy.
Okay, just one small point. You say in relation to paragraph 10(160), conditions may be opposed restricting the range of uses and permitted development rights in relation to change of use. Physical extensions may be opposed where justified and reasonable. MPPF says where appropriate and reasonable, clear justification is required. And this is a general point. Is that the same thing? clear justification and what you say is where necessary and reasonable?
It is essentially the same thing, and it could apply in any number of applications, any number of policies. We have referred to it, that wording specifically in a couple of policies in this chapter. I think the reason for that is in those specific instances, there have been particular concerns about unregulated changes of use, if you want to put it that way, and permitted development not necessarily being appropriate.
Yeah.
And the reason that we mention them here is that these occur in more of these specific circumstances as opposed to more generally. However, if you don't think it serves that useful purpose.
I'll come to a view on that. But don't worry, I don't need any more help on that. Now, we've got policy E10 and E11. E10 dealing with farm diversification. Basically support using firstly existing buildings and then additional where essential. Does anybody wish to say anything on that policy? Because I don't need any more help on that. And the same with policy E11 that sets out support for visitor related development within the countryside. Does anybody wish to say anything on that? Okay, I'm going to leave those because I don't need any more help on those. Could we turn to policy E5, enhancing employment opportunities, and E6, retaining employment opportunities? So the first one, E5, is provides support for new development or redevelopment of land and buildings for employment uses within industrial and office use classes, directing town centre uses, importantly, directing town centre uses to town centres. Yes? So can you
yes, that's correct, yeah.
Could you just for me explain your approach to uses that don't fall within the list that you've got listed E5 1 to 3?
Yes, if you just bear with me a second.
It comes back to the same point that's been made about leisure uses, doesn't it? And education and health and those concerns. So how do you deal with something that doesn't fall within that list? Employment uses are considered to be the following, and you give a list, don't you? So something that wouldn't fall within that list.
Yes, I think this goes back to its relationship with E1, the general economic strategy, which talks about a wide range of activities and uses that can support the economy of the district, whereas E5 and E6, its related policy, refer specifically to what might be called the traditional employment or industrial use classes, and promoting development and redevelopment of those, or new development, and trying to retain the existing.
That's right.
Provision.
These two policies work together, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yes.
Supporting employment opportunities. The other basically is protecting.
Yes, and there is development pressure generally, and Winchester in particular has pressure for higher value redevelopment proposals, particularly residential, but also others which can affect existing employment uses. And it's also a finding of Lambert Smith Hampson's study that we should be maintaining our existing stock of employment supply.
Yeah.
And so therefore we would be looking for redevelopment proposals to provide another activity within those use classes in the first instance, and then would need to justify why it was no longer required for those purposes.
I'm sorry, could you
Sorry,
say that
It
again?
would need to be demonstrated why it was no longer required for employment purposes.
I'm sorry, my first question, I've got that, but my first question in relation to E5, please. I'm sorry if you did answer it, but I haven't got still that you've
Yeah.
got a list there.
Yes, that's correct.
Some
Yeah.
uses aren't included in that list. What is the consequence of that? Where are they dealt with, or where is the support for those uses? I mean,
Yes, those uses that you referred to there are really back down to what we talked about earlier. They would be generally covered in E1. And on a case-by-case basis. I mean, a lot of health provision, for example, may be appropriate within town centres, and retail is another one which we will be talking about in relation to Winnall. Again, that we have town centre policies that is where those are specifically dealt with. Most of the other uses referred to, such as supporting for academic institutions, if it's not at the campus itself, if it's some other administrative function, well then we can deal with that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, I've heard what you've said. That has answered my question 3. With when you were answering that question, you answered my question 3. So,
sorry, ma'am, can I just mention?
Yes, please.
Hopefully, paragraphs 10.93 basically show that relationship with obviously E5 and E1, because we're specifically saying that obviously there are other activities that generate employment uses that do not fall within obviously the definition of obviously the policy what's there. So hopefully we are showing that symbiotic relationship with policy E1.
Yeah. Okay, I've got that. Is there anything that anybody wishes to say, church commissioners? Mr. Grant?
Thank you, Inspector. Nick Grant on behalf of the church commissioners. As you'll have seen from our written representation, we think this policy is perhaps a little too restrictive. We've obviously taken on board what's in the explanatory text about the relationship with E1 and what's just been said. But the point that was made is uses that fall outside of 1, 2, and 3 can be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. But that's not what the policy allows. That's not what's in the closed list. Our respectful suggestion, therefore, is a very minor tweak to 3, or indeed an addition to 4, but it makes no difference, which is to suggest some sui generis and other activities or other activities, which just gives a little bit more flexibility for the council for activities that don't immediately fall within those closed lists, but might still be employment business led and generate employment space to be considered and gain support under this policy. And this is of particular concern to us, Ma'am, without venturing too heavily into Bushfield Camp, which we'll come to afterwards. As you're, I'm sure, aware in today's day and age, when it comes to universities spinning out businesses, for example, there and working closely with government and whatnot, a lot of what happens in modern campuses doesn't fall as neatly within those classes. So all we're suggesting is that little bit of flexibility. And similarly, there is a reference to employment and business led in 3. Query whether that should be and/or just in case there's a significant employment activity, but might not be considered a business in the strict term, but the land use elements of it, i.e. people going in and you know, generating employment, would actually be the same. What does business and profit have to add?
Comment from the council, please.
And we'll take that away and reflect on that. Clearly, the relationship with E1 is there, but there might be some merit.
Okay.
Said.
Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you. David Gleave again, this time representing solely the City of Winchester Trust regarding policy E6. We consider that the protection of employment land for business is crucially important, not least to avoid the need to reallocate additional land, notably countryside. We were therefore gratified when the council changed the Reg 18 wording of E6 from the potential of the site to be developed for a mixture of uses that it include an element of employment to a significant amount of employment. So that was a step in the right direction. However,
criteria 3, isn't it?
Yes, sorry.
Potential of the site or building to be developed for a mixture of uses that include a significant amount of employment.
Yes, E6.3. However, E6.6 we consider is still too liberal. The benefits of the proposed use compared to the benefits of the existing use is just too permissive. And we also note the change to H9, which now allows purpose-built student accommodation on other allocations. And I'm thinking of Winnell as well as Bushfield Camp. So that's our case. Thank you.
Okay. Response from the council, please. Is it too permissive, particularly 6? Benefits of the proposed use compared to the benefits of retaining the existing use.
And that's a consideration one would have to have in any application, frankly. So it's not permissive in any meaningful way. It's simply a statement of what
planning balance.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate to have it there then?
Ma'am, there have been occasions where applications in this wording was in the existing plan for completely different types of uses that may benefit the community, for example, but are not employment led at all. And in that case, the council has taken a sort of a wider balanced view from time to time.
Okay, you don't mention employment led. There's nothing in that policy that says employment led, does it? It speaks about a significant amount of employment and then states the planning balance, which would, as you quite rightly say, will relate to any development, won't it?
Yes, that's correct. So in that respect, perhaps that final criteria is
Could I ask
not
you to
necessarily.
look at policy 6 in light of the discussion that we're having? I haven't come to a view on it, but could you look at that, please? Okay. Thank you. It's now 11:45. What we'll do is we'll take a break until 12 o'clock. We'll come back and we'll deal with the site allocations. Now, there may be quite a lot of people who want to speak. If we do, could I just do a quick show of hands? Who is here wanting to speak about Bushfield Camp? I know that people might want to speak about quite a lot of things. Okay. Winnell? I'm expecting, River Park? And then University and Hospital. Okay. And then we've got Solent Business Park. Tollgate Sawmill and Morgan's Yard. Okay, so I think we'll take those last two and the former River Park Leisure Centre very quickly. And I'm just going to review any outstanding concerns that I've had, because obviously I've progressed my considerations on these, so I'll look at those. Now, what we will do is we'll come back. We've got an hour to deal with this. If I have generally, can you speak for no longer than 3 minutes, please? I will set up the programme officer here just to keep an eye on time, just so that we don't have just so that we get through matters in a timely way. Yes, please. I haven't decided that yet. I haven't decided that yet. I'll just have a look in the break. If I don't have anything to ask, having progressed my thoughts, I'm not going to raise them. Okay. Thank you. We'll come back at 12 o'clock, just past 12 o'clock, because we've just missed a minute there. Thank you.
Right. Hey, Ma'am. Adrian Fox, Strategic Planning Manager. So yes, there are a number of modifications with obviously the policy. So I think they start at MM54 on page 65. And the first one basically relates to nutrient neutrality. And obviously what we've done is basically work with Natural England to come up with basically the wording for that proposed modification. And basically it talks about obviously any nutrient neutrality solution that involves on-site wastewater treatment sites will need to be accompanied by an assessment of the impact on the River Itchen SAC through the discharges on the wastewater treatment plants, including groundwater modelling as agreed by Natural Environment and Natural England and the Environment Agency. So they are basically comments directly from the statutory agencies to make sure that policy is in line. That's correct. We had an objection from Natural England to the specific site application. We carried out some additional air quality work, and Natural England have now obviously withdrawn their objection to this particular site allocation. That's correct. That's correct. That's it, updated it. Yep. 1252, the additional text, and obviously the deletion of the criterion in the policy, and the additional criteria at the bottom, obviously about the occupation of the development will be phased to align with the delivery of sewage infrastructure in consultation with the service provider. That's correct. Yep.
Allocation, and what you've done is, and we know enough, we know the history. I don't need to go all over that. I've read it. So what you say is the 20 hectares is the developed area.
That's correct. The former army camp. Thank you, Ma'am. Well, the 20 hectares is obviously the former army camp, but obviously the site itself is 43 hectares. And obviously with these proposals, we do want the whole site to be considered basically in a comprehensive manner, similar to our other strategic allocations. But obviously we are limiting the actual development to the 20 hectares. And we want to make that point entirely clear. And obviously the other land, obviously, I think the applicants referred to it as the legacy land, about basically how that could be used. And they are in active discussions with basically Sparshott College about how that site, the legacy land, could be used, basically, which is, well, it's the actual area beyond the 20 hectares, basically, is, yeah, because the site's 43 hectares, it's the other bit of the site that basically people do access at the moment. Yes, we feel that it does meet the definition in the NPPF or PDL. There are clearly structures visible on the sort of site when you go to the site. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Yep. That's right. Apologies, I hadn't realised you hadn't visited the site yet. So, yes, there are, when you go up there, Mum, there are clearly visible structures in terms of basically the kind of skeleton frame of obviously some of the buildings. There's hard standing areas which are clearly basically demarked. And basically, when you look at the definition in the NPPF, clearly nature hasn't taken over this site, which obviously in some situations obviously has happened. But in this case, we do feel strongly that that 20 hectares is PDL, meeting the definition in the NPPF.
So that's PDL. There's something there already. So is there any other justification for the 20 hectares in the developable area in terms of all those constraints that we've spoken about?
Well, we've got obviously a very detailed policy, quite lengthy in terms of the criteria that basically address those other constraints. And obviously it's building on the back of obviously an existing policy in the adopted local plan, which is obviously being reviewed to make sure we pick up obviously all those issues that one would need to expect obviously as part of the planning application process. And obviously we've done that in discussion with obviously the statutory agencies to make sure we've picked up all those issues.
Are any of these there are a whole range?
No. Yeah, we don't think there are any complete showstoppers in terms of the obviously the development itself. Obviously that's in an established adopted local plan. Obviously the need for the development is underpinned by the employment study in terms of basically the evidence base that we've got for the local plan. And like I say, we feel that the criteria basically that we've got in the policy W5 adequately affect obviously and would need to go through obviously with obviously the development management process to how you address those criteria. Yeah, we've obviously, similar to Sir John Moore Barracks, we've done the concept master plan process, which obviously has gone through cabinet. So basically, obviously, we've established obviously the parameters for how the site could be developed. That indicates obviously the whole site. Actually, the concept master plan that was agreed at cabinet deals comprehensively with the whole site.
That supports the development that this is talking about, and that's been agreed by cabinet. And we know because we've had previous discussions on the process for the development of concept master plan, that will be a material consideration in the implementation of the application.
That's correct.
Right at the moment, I've read all the comments from the people and objectively.
It obviously did. Yeah. Yeah, not obviously the 20 hectares, but obviously the other land, which I'm calling the legacy land, is used by the community. But obviously, the applicants are here. They'll be able to obviously clarify what rights they've actually got. No, basically the 20 hectares is not kind of a public accessible kind of part of the site. Yeah.
Is that right? There is.
That's right. It's not formally accessible. Obviously, when I say accessible, obviously if you want to get into the site, you could, but obviously it's not easily accessible. I think it probably. I think basically with the church commissioners, I think that would be the wise. We can give you the contact details.
So, that's my next question. So, how is it used by the community? What part is used and then other people will be able to contribute?
Like I say, I personally don't know the actual ins and outs of obviously how it's used. Obviously, people do go up there. It's basically obviously an accessible area that people do go up there and recreate and obviously walk, etc., and enjoy it. But obviously, you know, that's up to individuals in terms of how they use that space.
Findings are before me. Does that have any bearing on this allocation?
No, I don't think so. In terms of obviously the conclusions of that, and obviously, I believe that's set out. In the here we go.
I know that.
Yeah, it would. Yes. I think that's set out actually in the seen it here in the yeah, it's free mains here. You can't that bit too.
On the application that we all know wasn't successful, but they made comment on it and it's relevant to this allocation. You've read those obviously. You have.
Well, I think the fact it was unsuccessful is the key to it. Is obviously it was unsuccessful, so yes, it is kind of a material consideration in light of it, but that doesn't stop obviously this allocation.
Could everyone hear me? I'm sorry about that. It's on the edge of Winchester. You've heard the concerns about that in terms of the impact on the need to travel and accordance with the spatial strategy. Could I have a view from the council on that, please?
Well, we think obviously the fact it is on the edge of Winchester is obviously to its advantage, and obviously what that can actually bring in terms of obviously employment that can be accessible to obviously the wider community. The applicants are actually obviously part of the live planning application looking at obviously public accessibility and how the site can be improved in terms of walking, cycling, things like that. That's part of the application that is in with us at the moment. And we feel that obviously that would help in terms of obviously supporting obviously Winchester Town in terms of basically its economic base, because you are bringing employment basically very close to obviously the existing population. And obviously it can be accessible by obviously different modes of transport.
Is it?
obviously the work that the applicants are doing in terms of basically demonstrating how it can be accessible in terms of obviously the increase in public cycling and walking basically is part of obviously the work that they are doing at the moment. But I'm sure they're about to elaborate on the work that they're doing at the moment to make it more accessible.
Okay. In terms of now, I don't want to stray in to the application because there's a live application that came in 2023, was it?
That's correct.
Why is it taking so long? Sorry.
There was an objection from National Highways and Hampshire County Council, mainly to do with the traffic impacts of the development. And basically the applicants had to do more transport modelling, basically as a result of that standing objection. We understand that basically there has been productive conversations now with National Highways and Hampshire to basically remove that objection and to move forward. We as a City Council are waiting for further information, which we will be consulting on in due course on that additional information that was requested. And we as a local planning authority also asked for some additional information on a number of points as well. So they will be obviously addressed as part of the resubmission of the planning application.
Okay, so there's a live application in, but it's been a lengthy process. It's been an extant allocation since 2013 or whatever. So what evidence is there that it will come forward in this plan period?
I think the evidence is the fact that there is a live planning application that has had a significant...
Has there ever been a live application before?
No. So this is obviously a turn in obviously events in terms of obviously what's actually happened. There's been significant investment by obviously the applicant basically to provide obviously the information to date and the additional information that obviously they will be coming forward. So there is obviously in our mind basically a clear obviously demand for the site, and I'm sure obviously the church commissioners can obviously elaborate further on in terms of what work they've done.
Okay, I'm going to okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Could I open it up to those around the table, please, who would like to contribute? Church commissioners, are you? Sorry, there are two people. Mr. Southgate. Oh, thank you very much.
Sorry, Inspector. Would it be all right if we effectively go last once we've heard anything else? Because there are some parts that we will need to pick up and clarify from the council, but there may be other things that get said that we also need to clarify. Would it be all right if you come back to us at the end? Thank you. I appreciate it.
Say Bushfield Camp, please, Mr. Is it Jennings? Mr. Jennings.
Sorry. I was saying I probably know the Bushfield site more than anyone in this room. I've walked on it almost daily, the entire site, for the last 40 years, without let or hindrance for the majority of that time until an application was made previously. And I would like to just address Mr. Fox's point in that there have been, to my knowledge, at least 4 applications for development in that 40 years, all of them unsuccessful. Prior to the current application.
Okay, the council, please. I'll come back to you on that point, please. Thank you. And what is? Sorry, can I just ask you a question? What is it used for by the local community? Is it walking? It's open space?
It's used for a range of activities. In terms of the entire area is walked on. As I say, until a previous application, when the landowners put up a very small number of signs identifying permissive use. Prior to that, over the previous 50 years, it was walked on. In fact, when I was involved in the Town and Village Green application, which was actually initiated by Hampshire County Council, because prior to the Town and Village Green application, there was an application put forward for rights of way across the land in 2003. Hampshire County Council reviewed it and came back to the local group that had made the application, and said it wasn't appropriate for rights of way because there was no single entry and exit point. In fact, the entire area was walked across. There were multiple entry and exit points. And Hampshire County Council recommended an application for town and village green status. And I won't take you through the whole detail of that, but the outcome of that was that the inspector found that the application was duly made, and the entire site, this is including the area of the old camp, which simply was agricultural land prior to being taken over by the War Office. And unlike other land that was taken over by the War Office, when it was returned to the owners, it wasn't returned to its original use. It was simply left to degrade. And so the inspector found that the application for town and village green status was acceptable. The church commissioners, the landowners, objected. It went to the High Court. Mr. Justice, I'll tell you his name. Mr. Leslie Blom, who's now is on as Judge Blom, who was the inspector, found for the application. Mr. Justice Collins, sitting in the High Court, found the application was correctly and duly made, and therefore the land was appropriate. The church commissioners then took it to the Court of Appeal, and on a 2-to-1 majority, the judges in the Court of Appeal found that on a process point of timing as part of the application process, that the timing was too long.
Okay.
And therefore it was struck down.
Yes.
So it was nothing to do with the applicability of the area as a community resource. And I would say, well, we gathered some 180 affidavits from people who'd walked in over that period. But in fact, there are thousands of people every day. There are many people who use it for walking, bird watching, running, all sorts of activities on a daily basis.
And can you, at this point, now I know and I've heard that there isn't formal access to the area that what was the camp area. Could you tell me, is it open to the public?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And if anyone would like to go up there at any time between, particularly in the mornings, between maybe 6:30 and 9 o'clock in the morning, you'll find residents from four local communities, from Badger Farm, from Stanmore, from St Cross, and from Oliver's Battery, who use it on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would be, I don't know whether I should say this, but I would be delighted for someone to challenge me on walking that, because I've walked it for 41 years. I've never been challenged. I've actually never seen anyone, either an agent of the landowner or the landowner, on it.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Could I turn Mr. Marsh, please? Thank you.
So I'm Ben Marsh, and I'm representing Save Bushfield Camp Group. So I wanted to talk about biodiversity and the designating of 20 hectares, as I believe it's unjustified.
Mm-hmm.
So the area, as you pointed out, is a sink, Mom, and falls entirely within the land identified in the local nature recovery strategy as of high biodiversity value. The council have noted that the boundary appears to be based on the historic military footprint and not current ecological evidence. And I'd like to raise that this approach ignores Natural England's mitigation hierarchy. The top rung of that hierarchy is to avoid, and so they're effectively embedding biodiversity loss into the policy. Crucially, there are no defined limits on density, floor space, or building height, and which leaves the prospect of a high impact scheme. The high impact schemes, like the one that is currently under consideration, will produce edge effects, such as light and noise pollution, and which are unaccounted for, and will degrade retained habitats, undermining biodiversity net gain and the Environment Act 2021.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marsh. Could I turn to Councillor, is it Laming?
Thank you. You got it right. Safe Bushfield Group is informed to make sure that you have a concise, detailed objections to what is going on. And to that end, you've got the Badger Farm Residents Association, the Badger Farm Parish Council, which is supported by Mr. Heron here, Compton and Shawford Parish Council, Oliver's Battery Parish Council, Otterbourne Parish Council, Twyford Parish Council, as well as the City of Winchester Trust, Winchester on Action Climate Change, as well as the ward councillors. There is sufficient data that we've given you, I think, to take due consideration on whether this should actually proceed as a site. And when you visit Bushfield Cap, we'd be more than happy to be there and show you around as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So in light of that, I'll hand over to the rest of our people.
Could I turn to Mr. Heron, please?
Thank you and good afternoon, ma'am. There are many points that have been raised around this allocation, but if you just give me, I'll just address two of them, one briefly, and that is item 5 in the criteria within the policy, and that is around the connectivity and create a permeable place. And I think there are some real challenges around how that is demonstrable. It's a very isolated site in the fact that it is cut off from the main areas by a railway line. I think, I wouldn't want to go into it too much detail. If you look at the application that's been submitted, the applicants have struggled. So I think there is a concern around that. But the main one, ma'am, I wanted to address was criteria 10 around the impact of the design on the relationship with the national park. And I'm concerned here that with the modifications that have been agreed in main modification 26 to take account of the levelling up and Regeneration Act.
None of these.
I think, ma'am, the policy here doesn't reflect.
None of the main mods have been agreed.
Sorry,
none of the main modifications have been
proposed.
Proposed. Yeah. Sorry, can I just turn that up, please? Thank you.
Because of that, I think the policy in this allocation doesn't reflect in there the requirement to take account of the changes brought in by the Levelling Up Act. And I think, ma'am, it isn't sound in the sense unless this policy is also adapted in the same way to reflect the requirements that have been changed in the proposed modifications to NE8. I think this is a site that is incredibly visible from within key points within the South Downs National Park, particularly St Catherine's Hill. We have been seeing through this and through previous applications on this site the importance that has been attached to that visual impact. And I think the policy as it's drafted at the moment doesn't reflect the increased requirements that the Act.
Okay, I get your point. Thank you. Could I turn to Mr. Gagg, please?
Thank you, ma'am. The background to this that is important to me is that half the carbon emissions of Winchester District are from transport. And we'll talk about that in some strategic detail in relation to CN1 and T1, etc. But I want to link that fact to this discussion because this is by far the most transport emissions sensitive proposal in the whole local plan. And I think it is fundamentally flawed to suggest that this type of development should be put in this type of place and still expect that Winchester City Council is going to achieve its climate targets. That therefore means that this, including this site in this plan in this way, will risk having a major contradiction within the plan, which cannot make it sound.
And that's because of the location.
Because of the location. So the outstanding outline planning application gives us some clue about the damage that access to this site will cause in terms of Winchester District's climate emissions. The transport assessment for that outstanding planning application indicates that there will be 4,542 more car journeys a day, which would have a major impact on the overall already too high transport footprint. And in order to achieve Winchester City Council's targets implied by CN1, we need to have a 20% reduction per year of transport. However, the overall transport assessment estimates that by 2041, there will be a 2 to 3% increase in transport emissions in Winchester. It has been argued, and there have been references here, to the idea, well, active transport will sort it out. Everyone will cycle and walk there, so it's not a problem. Well, if that is the case, there should be specific active transport requirements attached to this site. I can only suggest that if there are not active transport requirements attached to this site, the investment in transport infrastructure, in active transport infrastructure, in travel plans, and in terms of perceived deterrence to potential occupants means that very little has been proposed and very little is required in the way that this plan is drafted. I would be relatively happy if there were major requirements that everyone should cycle there, but that is not part of the policy. And I can't see that without some radical, almost revolutionary set of requirements like that, just like there are revolutionary requirements in this local plan for building quality and insulation of new properties, I would accept that. But we are ignoring the fact that we're going to increase our transport emissions at the same time as pretending in CN1 that we're going to achieve net zero by 2030. So I think this is a major conflict of ideas here. And in terms of the discussion earlier today, I would have made contributions about out-of-town developments for economic that would increase the transport footprint, because I know we can't increase the transport footprint and expect to do something meaningful to reduce the sort of hot spring and possible drought, etc. This is the hottest spring we've ever had. It is time to act. And we're not doing that. We're having this sort of discussion, which is a bit like talking about your favorite television program on the Titanic going towards an iceberg. The traffic modeling of the current application shows that 47%, or assumes that 47% of the traffic that will want to access the site will come along the motorway from places like, presumably from places like Basingstoke, Southampton, and further north. So it does seem that the traffic modelers at least do not believe that this is meeting a local need. It believes it's meeting a regional need. So I'm really, really worried that other really valuable policies about climate in the local plan and major commitment expressed in the blurb are going to be betrayed if we go ahead with this development, which can only increase the transport footprint and mean that the council fails in its other policies.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gagg. Can I turn to Mr. Baker, please?
Thank you, ma'am. I'd just like to pick up what the council said about previous planning applications. Between 1978 and 2002, There are a number of development proposals as well as landscape studies, and these were set out in Appendix A to our representations. But I would draw your attention particularly to two applications, one for residential and one for a superstore, which were made to the city and the county planning authority at that time. And these were rejected on the grounds that the only appropriate use for the site of the camp were agriculture and recreation. If I may, I would just like to then proceed and do a very short background to the current situation in terms of planning, because in 2009, the council commissioned Vale Williams, a commercial property estate agent in Southampton, to carry out a viability study for the development of a knowledge park at Bushfield Camp. That study made no reference to the importance of the site in the landscape, but it did lead the council to include in the 2013 local plan an allocation of 20 hectares of land at Bushfield Camp as an opportunity site. The inspector modified this use in policy WT3 to employment use, which was accepted by the council. Adoption of policy WT3 in 2013 represented an abrupt change by the council about their regard for the landscape value of the site of the camp that have been consistently recognised and supported in past planning decisions and planning studies over the preceding 35 years. The council also refers to this site being on the edge of Winchester. It isn't, it's in the countryside, to which countryside and rural policies in this plan need to be assessed, which I would like to do. I'm happy to do it now or to do it a little later, whichever you wish, ma'am.
Sorry, what would you like to do?
I would like to assess the concept master plan against the policies that the plan.
Okay, can I be very clear? I'm not going to deal with the. I'm not here to deal with the outline application. I am going to deal with the policy and the framework. That's for another day. So please, and nobody has so far, but please don't get into the details of or the specifics of the application that's before the council, because that isn't before me for decision making.
But ma'am, the concept master plan is a material consideration.
Yeah, it is.
And we feel that should be assessed against the policies in the local plan.
Okay, let me think about that. Thank you. Mr. Marsh, could you be very quick, because you have already had an opportunity to speak, and then I'll put it to the church commissioners, please, to respond to the points.
I think David Gleave wanted to speak as well. But yeah, I just had a quick point that I agreed with Mr. Heron's point about the national park. And this was something that Natural England picked up within the current planning application, was that the National Park Authority are the experts on the kind of the landscape aspect of it. And I wondered if some clear limits on density, height and site lighting could be added to the policy in consultation with the South Downs National Park Authority Landscape Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Very quickly, Mr. Gleave.
Well, it's another question, I'm afraid. Is it appropriate now to talk about the arcane world of employment, land supply and requirement or not?
You can. The justification in relation to the employment land study. Okay.
Yes, well, it's in fact in relation to two employment land studies, the 2024 and the 2020 predecessor.
Yeah.
Okay, so with apologies, I must refer very briefly to the application and I'll tell you why. Policy 5 is ambiguous because it doesn't define the quantum of floor space or land for respective use classes for respective use classes. Mixed use, high quality, flexible business and employment space, innovation centre stroke education hub and knowledge quarter are not use classes. Policy 5 states that land at Bushfield Camp is allocated for a mixed use, high quality, flexible and employment space, innovation, education and creative, provided that 20 hectares is built development and it doesn't compete or detract or undermine from Winchester Town Centre. And if I may, I'd like to say very few words after I talked about office employment land. Therefore, given that the policy is ambiguous, if not opaque, you have to look to the planning application, which significantly has been prepared in consort with the planning authority under a planning performance agreement. So we must assume that the application is at least consistent with W5, and therefore the application gives an insight into what is implied, though not stated in W5. The application includes 30,300 square metres of office, use class EG1, and 30,000 square metres of R&D, use class EG2. Now, turning to the June 24 employment land study, it provides forecasts of how much additional office floor space is required. It's important to stress that Bushfield Camp has never been suitable for Class B general industry, nor indeed Class B8 warehousing and logistics. 11.8 hectares of the 20 hectares we've referred to earlier of developable land is specifically identified for offices and not for employment land. It's for offices. G1, offices. 4.8 hectares of use class B1B or EG2 R&D, and 3.4 hectares of B1C light or EG3 light industry. And you have the references. In passing, it's unclear as to whether policy W5 or indeed the planning application refers to light industry, i.e. EG3, which comprises one of the three elements of the 12.2. The employment land study forecasts to take account of the ongoing trend towards working from home and hybrid working in reducing, we heard a figure earlier, reducing the need for additional office space. To quote ARA 10.4.4, this notwithstanding, the forecast based on past completion trends shows a much lower requirement for 3.3 hectares of office land, while the forecast suggests that this wouldn't be sufficient to support the significant increase in office-based jobs in Winchester shown in all three forecasts. This could potentially be offset by a lower office demand due to increased home working. Therefore, the completions trend forecast could be considered as a lower end of the range of needs. Now, the 12.2 hectare average forecast also includes 3.4 hectares to replace offices lost to other uses in the centre of the town, and 0.8 of a hectare for a 5-year margin. If the 3.4 or 4.2 hectares is included from the 12.2 hectare average, then the requirement falls to either 8.8 hectares or 8 hectares. Similarly, if the 11.8 hectares of office land proposed for Bushfield Camp is excluded from the overall supply, then the supply falls to 5.2 hectares. So in conclusion, and noting the guidance in the latest employment land study, the supply of office land, excluding Bushfield Camp of 5.2, is sufficient to meet the requirement for additional office land based on past completions, namely 3.3, and close to the 8 hectare average economic forecast, excluding the replacement element. So given the lack of evidence for the need for additional office land, as well as the potential impact of the development, policy W5 should be dropped. Now, may I briefly just refer to the 2021?
Very briefly.
Very
because
briefly.
you've already.
Yeah, I know, I've hit my 3 minutes, I'm sorry. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to draw your attention, Ma'am, to another additional piece of evidence, namely the Stantec 2020 employment land study, because it talked about the size of allocation, the nature of the allocation, and the relationship to the town centre. So I think it is relevant. Paragraph 6.36 of this Stantec study said.
Sorry, what are you referring to?
This is the predecessor of the 2024 employment land study conducted in 2020.
Okay.
And it, as I say, contains a number of relevant passages.
Okay.
So paragraph 636 of this study says, turning to how much land to retain and reallocate, our view is that it is unlikely that all of the 20 hectares of the proposed allocation could be justified in this round of the local plan. The next paragraph, 637, in the round, this would suggest that around 50% of the current site could be justified in the next round for industrial processes. This minimum would sum to a total of 10 hectares at this site, plus the remaining 5 hectares, blah, blah, blah. And finally, paragraph 4.109, the allocation of Bushfield Camp for 20 hectares of employment land was initially earmarked to deliver some form of office space. But as mentioned, this site has not come forward for development yet, and nor is this the best use of the site, considering that our research and consultation outlines that the demand for office space in Winchester would be better suited to be near amenities rather than out of town. We recommend Bushfield Camp be sought to deliver high-tech industrial units to satisfy the local demand rather than office space, which is coming from other suitable locations.
Okay.
I have one last comment on potential impact of the town centre, which I can carry on or do later.
Okay, I'm very conscious of the time. It's now 10 to 1. Could you please succinctly make your comments on the impact of on Winchester Town Centre? Because I've read those documents. I don't need to be brought through them in detail.
Okay.
Could you just give me your headline?
Very briefly.
Thank you.
As I've said, there is a relationship between the provision of 60,000 square metres of B1A and B1B at Bushfield and the stock of office accommodation in the town centre by virtue of the replacement allowance in the employment land study. We consider that another 60,000 square metres of office and R&D, which represents 3/4 of the city centre's office stock, so it's a substantial amount, could impact the viability of the city centre in 3 ways. Attracting existing occupiers out of the centre if the space is more attractive by virtue of the 2,000 on-site parking spaces, potentially lower rents, rateable value, lower business rates and no bid levy. Secondly, questioning the viability for office development of major complex redevelopment opportunities such as Central Winchester and Station Approach, Cattle Market. And finally, encouraging owners of central offices in the city centre to seek change of use to more lucrative uses, quoting alternative provision at Bushfield Camp. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, could I just turn to the council, please? The status of the outline application and consideration as part of the assessment of a local plan. Please, question for the council. I'm looking at you, Mr.
Sorry.
Yeah. Mr. Baker raised the issue of an assessment of the outline application. I said what I thought about that. Could I just have your view on that, please?
Yes, I mean, the two, for the purposes of considering the local plan, the two are not related other than really the fact that it exists. Now, it may be, and we'll hear from the church commissioners if there is anything to say about this, that there are some issues which the local plan allocation deals with, which may be illustrated by aspects of the application and give you comfort on some of those. But in broad terms, your task is not to assess the application, it's simply to consider whether this allocation is sound. And the two things don't really interact.
No, I just wanted a view on that. Thank you. Okay, can I turn to the church commissioners, please?
Thank you, Mum. I'm grateful. I will do my best to hit 3 minutes, but in light of the 57 or so minutes of objection, I may struggle. If I may start with the relevance of our underlying application, our point is very much aligned with what Mr. Fraser-Urquhart just said, which is, insofar as you were minded to look at it, it's an illustration of what might be able to come forward on this site. You may consider it mildly helpful for your showstopper question, because it's an example in the way that one looks at an outline, when one's assessing an outline itself. Are there showstoppers at detail stage? It's a similar thing. So that's about as far as we would suggest it goes, if you're minded to look at it at all. Our submissions on this plan don't depend on you looking at the underlying application. We would simply state that you do the concept master plan, which has been referred to, is already in the examination library. So you can have regard to that if you so wish. It's there, it's before you, but as Mr. Fraser-Urquhart said, illustrative. In responding to the other points that have been made, I think possibly easiest to start with history, then where we are now, then looking forward, if that helps structure it. A point was made about previous planning applications on this site. I think, as was fairly acknowledged, those were all pre-allocation in any event. The superstore that's referred to is from 1984, a marginally different world now, and so its relevance for you, Mum, with respect, non-existent. Turning then to past and indeed current community use. Mum, could I ask you to turn to page 331 of the plan so that I can illustrate, not the plan, the plan, so that I can illustrate the points, which is the start of the employment allocations Bushfield site section. If I could ask you to look at the left-hand oblong, you'll see at the very top there's sort of a zigzag that goes about halfway across the site from right to left. If you were to continue that roughly northward, to west, that tip, the northern tip of that, is where permissive access has been granted. Anything south of that, whatever may be enjoyed in practice, is not something to which permissive access has been granted and over which there are no rights. That becomes relevant both for now, but also when we're talking about the impact of this allocation on public access. It has in the past had access restricted. The Mr. Justice Collins decision, which I'll come to in a moment, makes the point that what prompted this was in fact fencing going up in around 2003, and that's at paragraph 2. Turning then to the TVG application, as you've already noted, it wasn't granted. I, with respect, don't think the judgment says what others have suggested it says. The case itself turned effectively on, there was a limitation period for making a TVG application of 5 years. In that case, an application was filed, but not properly, just at the end of the 5-year period, and then was retrospectively rectified after that 5-year period. Mr. Blanc-Cooper case, QC, and the High Court said, that's fine, you can do that. The Court of Appeal said no. What there isn't in the High Court case, if you decide to read it, Ma'am, is actually any suggestion or discussion of the merits of the underlying application. So where there is reference to the application being duly made, which is a point that has been picked up already, The point is, technically, was it made in time? That's what duly made is, not was there anything in it supporting the point. So that's as far as that High Court decision goes. It was also, for context, obviously, background. The High Court decision had been and gone by the time of the allocation in 2013. So to the extent it had any relevance, it would have been taken into account then, and the site was still allocated. There's been discussions of applications to register a public rights of way. That was news to me. I don't know whether it was news to my team, but the key point was that it was unsuccessful. Also, for relevance, Ma'am, there was an application to register this as an asset of community value. And that was an application over the whole, or almost all the allocation. And that was decided in March 2025 this year. And that was refused based in part on insufficient evidence being presented of actual or current or recent use, which is not ancillary use of the land and which furthers the social well-being or social interests of the local community. So those are the official bits you've got about usage. In effect, it's restricted. We could put fences up tomorrow. Then, Ma'am, we get to the where I think your questions started, which is how can we justify 20 hectares, which is another bit. In terms of the points that have been made regarding do we need X amount of office space, I'm going to unashamedly leave that to the council and kick it as far away from me as possible because it seems very technical. In terms of all the other points that I can pick up, this is obviously a key large employment allocation in Winchester. It's important. It's important if you want the kind of thing that this allocation is designed to bring forward and the economic and employment benefits that it comes with. That comes with the land use because you need a critical mass for this sort of development. You wouldn't achieve the benefits if you've got some parts of it over here in the north of Winchester, some parts in the south. So then the question is, how do you justify the 20 hectares? Now, we, as I've said, there's an illustration in the concept master plan which looks at all the site opportunities and constraints and says this is fine, this is how we've designed it. Illustrative, not determinative for policy, but shows in our submission there's no showstoppers. Picking up some of the relevant points that are alleged to be showstoppers that have been made. If I can start with highways and transport, in terms of the national highways points, part of which was said earlier, the bit that's gone into the underlying planning application, which was referred to earlier, it's a standard holding response. In effect, what's happening is there were discussions with National Highways, there were discussions with Hampshire. We're engaging with Hampshire primarily, and National Highways are content for them to take the lead. Once that's sorted with Hampshire, we'll be able to go back to National Highways. So it's not that we're ignoring National Highways, that's the method on which the parties are agreed.
Yeah, get that.
As part of those discussions, there have been two options. We're now at a stage where we're just finalising one with Hampshire, but the discussion has always been which of the options, it's not whether any is acceptable. So highways, my respectful submission, not a showstopper. In relation to the greenhouse gas impacts of highways, which is another point that's been raised, obviously there are two elements to this. There's one is how many vehicle movements generated, and then the next is the greenhouse gas output of those vehicles. I don't want to get into the underlying application here, but in part you could use this and the fact that any major development will generate some greenhouse gases as an excuse to refuse anything, and that is with respect, if we were to refuse this, then we wouldn't be meeting a lot of what the plan requires in its other needs. So there's a trade-off. Also, of course, the greenness of the fleet is something that's affected not just by this local plan, but by national movements. I'm sure will be aware that the government announced, I think it's a couple of weeks ago, the phasing out of internal combustion engine vehicles from 2030. So it's subject to national changes as well. One can't simply assume that there will be vehicles, there will be movements, therefore it generates greenhouse gases. So again, Ma'am, a point that we respectfully submit, not a showstopper at this stage, not saying it's immaterial, but something to be considered at application stage, but not a reason to stop this allocation. It can be dealt with later down the line. In terms of some of the other points you've raised, Mum, in your question, the gap, the landscape, green qualities, biodiversity net gain. The 20 hectare developable area leaves the majority of the site undeveloped. Now, that, insofar as it's illustrative and the work we've done on our application, that undeveloped site can deliver more than 10% biodiversity net gain. A point was raised that it wouldn't. We're confident it can. It's a significant enough area to avoid adverse impacts on the sink, or if not possible, to re-provide other similar highly valuable habitats elsewhere within the site area. It's large enough to retain a large amount of trees or woodlands. We're proposing to create a new woodland, plant 500 trees, plant 490 metres of hedgerow, plant a new wildflower meadow. These are all illustrations of what can be achieved on that remaining point. In relation to the views from the National Park, obviously views from the National Park are part of this. They're part of the constraints we've looked at. They're not showstoppers here for a number of reasons. First, your current views from the National Park already include built form in Winchester. This will be some additional built form, but surrounded by green bits. More built form is not necessarily bad or even necessarily a particularly adverse impact. That might then turn on design, but design's a detailed matter, not a policy, not an allocation matter, or something that can be dealt with at a detailed stage. A point was raised about the new duties under Section 11A of the 1949 Act and the strengthening of that duty. The short point, Mum, is there's a court case on this. We can provide it if it would be helpful if it's not really been provided. But it's what that court case and its New Forest National Park case makes clear is what the new duty isn't, is if there's any harm, you must refuse. That's not what this duty does. It's a seek to further the purpose duty. So you look at, if I may summarise, look at whether the application would further the purposes of the national park. If you decide it does, which would include causing no harm, great, that's the end of the duty. If it were to decide that it doesn't, then it's still open to you to address and explain why this allocation should still come forward. So it's not it's not a showstopper, even if you thought this harmed the national park. And we also note, Mum, that actually I don't think there's been any objection by the South Downs National Park Authority either to this allocation or to the extent it's relevant to the underlying application. So that, I think, has dealt with the constraints, TVG, activity, national park emissions previous. I think, Mum, that picks up both why we say 20 hectares is eminently justified and justifiable and the points that have been made against us. Is there anything else with which I can help?
No, for the moment, that's fine.
I'm grateful.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Baker, you wanted to make a comment on the concept master plan in very brief terms, please. Could you, I presume that you don't think that it addresses all those constraints?
All I want to say, the concept master plan shows how W5 could be implemented.
Could be, yeah.
And that has to be measured because it is in the countryside and there are a number of policies. The particular showstopper policy I would contend is NE7, the settlement gap policy between Winchester and Compton. And that gap has just 3 farmsteads in it. And the purpose of a settlement gap is that any development should not threaten the generally open and undeveloped nature of the gap. 20 hectares of development represents a third of the walled city of Winchester. The walled city encloses 58 acres. So we're not talking about a minor development. In terms of magnitude, this is a major building development in the open settlement gap.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Yes.
Mum, I'm grateful. I'm not coming back on that. This isn't a rebuttal point. Do forgive me. There were a couple of things that got lost in the list of points I was picking up, so I apologise if I may have 30 seconds. First, having flagged why the TVG point is relevant, I then forgot to actually deal with it, which is the allocation with the remaining significant amounts of open space can be used as we intend to use it for, to dedicate it to the public. So it's a good news story, not a bad news story. The second point was that insofar as reference is being made to, for example, the Winchester movement strategy, which you'll have picked up in some of the written representations, I think it's part of the climate change point, and that talks about removing traffic from the city centre and putting drivers into the park and ride, and our site is next to the South Park and Ride. So actually there's a synergy there, if I may put it that way. Anything else I haven't picked up?
Okay.
I've got slightly lost. Did you want me to pick up deliverability as well now, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Go on.
I apologise. I was dealing with questions 1 and 2. As I set out earlier in the answer, what's being sought is effectively a knowledge quarter. That's what we're proposing now. The past allocation in the traditional business park uses have suffered pretty significant headwinds since it was allocated in 2013.
Yeah.
Brexit referendum, Brexit, COVID. It's pretty tough to bring any major site forward. The market is responding now very positively to urban campus style develops, which is what we're promoting here. UK universities and academic institutions recognise that importance, and they're improving for that kind of thing. So the market's a lot more in line with what we're promoting now, what's in this allocation, than have been your traditional sort of employment-led matter. And in terms of what we're doing, obviously the Church Commissioners have passed with Legal and General. In Gisborne, there's a partnership in place. L&G, Mum, you'll be familiar with, it's a household name. It's financially strong. It's not a develop and flip. It stays, it's a long-term investor. There's no legal or ownership impediments. We have, I think I'm okay to say, invested about 4 million in the process so far. That's not no money. And that wouldn't be being invested if there wasn't a real genuine belief in the deliverability of the site. The outline application is in, Mom, as you know. Construction's anticipated shortly after it's granted. And as there's been reference to, we're making new strategic alliances to bring this forward. One with Sparsholt College, for example, was already set out. So matters are progressing. So the long and short of it is, there are reasons and there are headwinds, but this scheme, this development, this allocation is eminently deliverable, and Church Commissioners and those they're partnering with genuinely believe that and are very much putting their money where their mouth is. It's
okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Grant. Very, very briefly, Ms. Turner.
Yes. Sorry, I was supposed to do the conclusions, but I'm not going to do that because I think from what you've been asking, you've understood our case. There's just one final point I'd like to make. This site has sort of segued from an employment allocation in 2013, to high quality, flexible business and employment space, innovation, education hub and creative industries. And now from left field, Mr. Grant has introduced a knowledge quarter. That seems to me a huge change, but it's worth looking back to the sustainability appraisal, which assesses this site as an employment site. So there's possibly a flaw in the process here, where this allocation has not been properly appraised on the sustainability appraisal or considered against reasonable alternatives. I mean, if the City Council wants a knowledge quarter, it should be looking across the whole district to assess where the best place for that would be.
Okay, thank you for that. Could I turn to the council, please? There are a couple of points that I'd like some help on. The first one is the comments that were made on the employment land study, please. Is that Lambert Smith Hampton? And the need, particularly for office?
Thanks, Inspector. A lot of the references I'm going to make now made them at some point earlier this morning. Yeah. But I'm going to try and pick up most of the points made by the gentleman to my left. I think it's probably just worth clarifying a few points really when references were made to office space. So I'm not going to ask you to turn to all these pages now, but it'd be helpful if you noted them down.
Yeah.
So this is in the ELS, and I'm taking you to the page 76 and page 77, in particular table 24 and table 25. And this is where we show that office space through this study in the collection of data and analysis is talking about use classes B1A, B and C. Those are then brought together and talked about in a general sort of term of office space, as so much as the industrial land is talked about, but that's B2 and B8. So I think that's just an important point to start with. The second point is, I guess, building on why is there such a range and how do we come to the different conclusions on those? And part of that was asking the question really, why do we have things like change patterns, flexibility, loss replacements, and things like that? And the discussion on that and the justification for using this really is born out of the requirements of the MPPF, which I took you to earlier this morning, and the various parts of the PPG. And that's around providing flexibility, margins of choice, response to changes in the economy. You can find those at pages 99, 100, and then also particularly for the loss replacement, which is quite a detailed assessment for Winchester, and that's from pages 69 to 72, and also the tables, table 21 and 22, and figure 22 and 23, and particularly for Winchester because of the Article 4 direction and how that should be treated in this particular local authority. And then that gets us back to, I guess, the final point, which was of the various tables that you were taken to within the document LSH produced, and then the matter statement produced by the gentleman and the group. And that gives you the range of 12.2 hectares to 3.3 hectares. And the discussion on that is set out at page 111, which I took you to this morning.
Yeah.
And paragraph 8.9.5 has a series of bullet points which considers those. And for Winchester, we're faced with two things really. The first is that the econometric forecasting shows there will be more jobs coming forward in those sectors which require those use classes. So forecasting houses are predicting there will be job growth. But then when we look at the past trends of what's being brought forward, we can see that there has not been a high level of overall office space being brought forward. So this is quite a range there. But I think the important thing that the council has taken away and considered through the recommendations is that you need to understand that if you provide too little space for employment land, particularly B1, BA and C, so those on what we've called the office space uses, you could effectively constrain economic growth, and therefore the economic ambitions of your local plan wouldn't be achieved. So as to where that's located, that's something obviously is a decision by the council. But I think the final bullet points in that paragraph 8.9.5, it's the penultimate one on page 111. It reads, however, we're still in a period of high change. Working practices remain unsettled and a new normal is yet to settle. These changes are beginning to filter down to business decisions regarding floor space requirements. However, this process is evolving and data on the subject is emerging and untested. I think that's we're saying there that the council should treat this range with some caution, and I would not necessarily advise to jump to the lowest figure there just because we've seen this change in recent years of more people working from home. What we see with my office agency colleagues is we see more people moving back to offices, and as the gentleman over there representing the Church Commission, different forms of employment space are emerging and working in different ways, which would fall within that broader description of office space.
Sorry, did you want to?
I've got one final point when you finish all yours.
Yeah, please.
It's simply with respect to this point about the LURA, the strengthened LURA duty. because the only reason I draw it to your attention is we had a discussion, if you recall, just to say that the case to which my own friend refers is probably worth your attention. We'll provide you with the reference either now or later. I've got it on screen in front of me. But just to say that although I chastise myself for not having had the case at my fingertips when we last spoke about this, I flatter myself that when you read it, it reflects exactly the logic of the submission that I made to you when we discussed this point before.
With regard to,
I think it was with regard to the landscape duties.
Yes, the landscape duties in relation to plan making.
Correct.
And no, yeah.
But,
okay.
as I say,
by all means, bring that.
Shall I just give you the reference now?
Yes, do.
Probably the easiest, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just called New Forest National Park Authority against Secretary of State, and it's 2025 EWHC 726 admin.
Okay, no, don't give me the reference. Provide me with exactly what you want me to refer to. But we did have this conversation, and I don't need any more help.
No, I'm not suggesting you do. I'm just saying that the case reflects exactly what I said to you at the time.
No. Well done.
Yes.
Okay. Okay then. I've heard what you've said. Is there anything that the council wish to say? Particularly, I just want one comment from the council on what you're seeking here. The generality of it, high quality, flexible business and employment space, etc. And a comment was made that actually doesn't pin it down. It ought to be more specific.
Yeah, I think the problem is to be so specific for the reasons my colleagues talked about in terms of obviously the period of change, and the use class orders don't really help us now in terms of being that specific. Hence why we went for that wording that we've got in policy W5 to basically allow that flexibility and to recognise that obviously we are in a period of flux and change.
Okay, thank you. There are two people. I'm very conscious of the time because we have overrun. Very quick comment, please, Mr. Dean.
Absolutely. This is a one sentence answer.
Yes.
If you want to look to an alternative way of expressing it, look to the Test Valley Section 18 local plan, which proposed, I think it was a 3-hectare extension to the University of Southampton Science Park. And it specifically gave a quantum for how much, 3 hectares, and a land use, e.g. So B1A, B1B and B1C. So that's an alternative way of expressing what the public should expect on that bit of land. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And I just wanted to mention a slight inaccuracy, Ma'am. The South Downs National Park Authority have raised concerns specifically about the heights and scale of the development.
Of the planning application?
Yeah.
The outline planning application. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Marsh. Okay, I'm going to move on. Now, it was inevitable that we would have overrun. I've already given the heads up. We have made arrangements to indicate to people on arrival that we may have overrun. I would suggest that we carry on, if everyone is comfortable to do so, that we carry on and we start this afternoon. I need to have a break, and I'm sure that you do too. That we start this afternoon session, probably 2:30. It may be later, depending on how we get on. And people will be notified. Something will go up. I had already made arrangements for something to go up on the website, and people will be notified on arrival. Okay. Could we please move on to Winnell? Now, the number of the matters of concern. Sorry, just before I finish, can I thank those people, members of the public and people who have come, Save Bushfield group. The way that you've organised yourself is so helpful to an inspector when you've got lots of people who want to say something and they want to say the same thing, and you organised yourself very well. So thank you very much for your contributions. They're very much appreciated. Thank you for that. If you do wish to go now, please do, bearing in mind the time. Thank you. Okay, so Winnell. That's W10. No, it's not. It's
W6, Mark.
W6. Thank you for that. And the purpose of this policy is the nub of it is to safeguard existing industrial uses in the Winnell estate. And what you do is you've got the area and you break it up into 4 sub areas. And in area 1 and 2, you're supporting B2 and B8 uses, and then you're providing more flexibility in 3 and 4. And the nub of the concern is that actually it's too restrictive, particularly in subzone 2. So please, can you justify your position on this, please?
Thank you, Ma'am. So Winnell is our major kind of employment site in the city centre, obviously just off Junction 9, which is obviously subject to major improvements. And our feeling is obviously that it is an important employment site. That's why we divided up into different zones. We are basically trying to obviously safeguard obviously the main employment uses as you come into Winnell from obviously the junction, and obviously the wording is around that. And obviously we've got different kind of categories of sites in terms of sub area 1, what's allowed, sub area 2 and sub area 3. But we feel that obviously there has been, and you'll notice it, I'm sure you may or may not have been through Winnell already, there has been obviously applications in the various zones. So obviously we've got a major superstore, Tesco's, basically as you come into Winnell from Junction 9. And there are obviously other uses in it, but obviously we have basically sought to restrict that to make sure that obviously we retain that core identity of Winnell as a major employment site. Obviously there has been obviously concern about obviously town centre uses, but obviously they would have to go through the sequential test anyway for any kind of town centre use. So we feel that obviously the policy is worded in a kind of restrictive way to basically retain obviously that employment core area, because once it's gone, and this is our major employment site. So we have reservations about basically giving more flexibility. That can obviously be dealt with at the planning application stage with the appropriate evidence base. And clearly that has happened in certain circumstances. You'll notice that as you drive through Winnell, where obviously there has been different uses in that area. But we feel at the development management stage, you can deal with that flexibility of applications coming forward for a different use.
Because you do have some other uses, don't you?
That's right. There's Tesco's. It's got quite noticeable. There are different uses there, but we feel you can deal with that through the development management stage, rather than basically a policy that basically we are worried about basically opening the floodgates up to kind of encourage those types of uses that we would want in the town centre.
Okay. In terms of retail, is there any conflict or disaccord with E4? E4 is dealing with the application of the sequential test.
I don't feel there's any conflict with that. Obviously, sequential test is in the NPPF anyway, so you would have to go through that as part of the planning application process and part of the planning balance.
Okay, let's hear what other people have.
Can I just, Mark, before you move on, just to observe that in terms of flexibility, the policy wording is a presumption. Obviously, the point about a presumption is it can be displaced with appropriate evidence. If you look at W6.
And where are you referring to?
Well, sub Little Roman 1, referring to sub area 1, there is a presumption in favour of the retention.
Okay.
Same with 2. Presumption in favour of the retention, which is not the same thing, obviously, as an absolute bar.
Does anybody wish to comment on this, please?
Thanks, Mum. Ed Rehall from Lichfield's Town Planning Consultancy, representing Marks and Spencer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to raise a couple of points in response to the council's response there. Whilst our client supports the continued allocation of Winnell as an employment area, M&S consider the policy as currently worded is unduly restrictive for employment generating uses outside of the traditional B2 and B8 use class. So we're looking from M&S standpoint, retail and food retail. So we feel as currently worded, the policy is not justified. Just to add as well, there are a number of long established non-B2 and B8 uses across sub-area 2. And these are established uses which have been permitted over a number of years, are important generators of jobs and economic growth. What we feel is the policy W6, as currently worded, fails to recognise this and the role of retailers within Winnell. And we suggest that flexibility is added, and we suggest some alternative wording in our hearing statement, which is quite similar to that within the Reg 18 version and also within the current adopted local plan. And we feel that that would overcome our concerns. As others will understand, retail is very dynamic, but we feel that the policy as currently worded doesn't actually reflect uses on the ground. There are a couple of things also within some of the supporting text within the local plan. Para 12.67, for example, does reference a degree of flexibility. 10.38 references with more flexibility in other parts of Winnell, for example. And also in the council's regulation 22 statement, that's SD07A, the council also recognise in their response there in response to a representation at the Reg 18 stage, that sub-area 2 and 3 for employment uses fall outside of B2 and B8 uses, which has been taken into account in the existing adopted local plan. So yes, that's just a short summary there, ma'am. We would refer you to our hearing statement.
No, I've read your hearing statement.
Thank you.
Thanks for response, please. Have you got anything further to say?
I don't think so, no. Just basically, obviously, the gentleman refers to obviously what's on the ground, but obviously that was proved through the development management process.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I would just add in terms of the retail need, we have not identified a requirement for additional sites to be allocated. We already have retail and leisure uses intended for the mixed use sites, which to me is preferable rather than allowing it in an out of centre location. And also I think it's worth looking at the capacity assessments in where I wrote this reference down. If you look at the 2024 study appendix A8 and A9, which are the convenience and the comparison, in table T11 and the summary T12, what we do is look at where the needs arise in terms of the main towns, because obviously it's linked to market shares, but also where the population is. And one of those sort of places we look at is rest of district / out of centre. And for both convenience and comparison, it is a negative capacity. There is no need for further retail provision out of centre.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Is there anything else anyone wants to say on that policy? Possession?
There's a modification proposed in respect to that. If Mr. Fox wants to use it. It's MM55 on page 67
yes.
of the latest document.
Thank you, Joan. Yeah, there is MM55, which basically clarifies the wording basically in policy W6, strengthening obviously that it is the main employment area in Winchester. And obviously just slight amendment again with sub area 4, again reintroducing the words the presumption will be in favour, picking up Mr. Urquhart's point about obviously the word presumption. And then obviously a comment from basically Southern Water about basically the sewer network capacity assessment during the planning application process, and obviously the layout and the design to allow basically access to existing underground infrastructure for maintenance and upsizing purposes, which is a similar comment they've made for other sites.
So you've actually changed, you changed criteria 4 to the presumption in favour.
That's right, basically to be the same as the other criteria. So for the same reasons Mr. Urquhart said about the word presumption.
Okay, I understand. Okay. Thank you for that. Let's move on, please, to policy W10. This is the former River Park Leisure Centre. Allocation for F1 uses, learning and non-residential institutions, so that's education, museum, exhibition space, indoor sport and recreation. So first of all, we've got a restricted covenant on the site. You've given me a view that you think that that's not going to restrict proposed uses under this policy. Is there anything else that you want to say on that? Because I think I'm quite clear on your position there. Others disagree.
Not in terms of restricted covenant. I think we've set that out clearly in our hearing.
Yeah. Have you got anything to comment on what others have said about that?
Only that obviously we've taken our legal advice in terms of obviously what the covenant says and obviously what should or should not happen on that site.
Okay. Okay, I've heard what you said. And in terms of the current use, it was a leisure centre, wasn't it?
That's correct. It was a leisure centre, I think, operating until 2021. Yeah, and obviously now we've got the new sports and leisure facility at Bar End. So obviously it closed then. It's been empty since that period.
So would it be captured by your policy that protects sports and recreation facilities? What is it? NE3, is it?
Well, it's actually interesting because obviously it's got a kind of a sui generis use in terms of obviously its planning permission. It's obviously it was a sports and recreation centre, but we did have a look back towards obviously the legal bit about what's it actually got permission for, and it was actually defined that actually it was actually a sui generis use.
So, but it was a leisure.
It was a leisure centre, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that? Are you saying to me that it accords with NE3 because of the criteria that relate to? So that speaks about alternative facilities provided, benefits to the community, no longer required. And obviously you've got a new leisure centre now. So are you saying that there isn't a conflict because it complies or anything?
That's right. There is no conflict because obviously they've got the new leisure centre.
Okay, and in terms of now, it's not the whole site, obviously. It's only a small part of the whole site, isn't it? Is there any open space there that would be protected, or would that?
Well, obviously there's, when you go down to the site, Mum, you'll see that obviously there's an existing building on the site.
I've been to
You've been
this
to the
one.
site. There's an existing building on the site. Obviously there's an indoor bowl centre and there's a skate park.
And is the indoor bowl still open or?
Yes, it's still operational.
Okay.
Still operational. The skate park is very well used, and obviously within the policy we've got that obviously to retain the skate park, or obviously part of the reconfiguration provides obviously skate park because it is a well used facility.
Okay, and in terms of the constraints, the whole range of constraints that we've got on a lot of the town centre sites, and I won't rehearse them all. What design work or what work have you done to assure me that those aren't going to be showstoppers for the allocation?
Well, in terms of obviously, first thing is obviously it's in a flood risk area.
Yeah.
And we've done a stage 2 SFRA with the assistance of the Environment Agency. So obviously that itself restricts what types of uses could go on the site.
Yeah.
So obviously it's not suitable for residential development. And obviously in terms of obviously where the policy was framed and where it came from was the fact that we were obviously in active discussions with the Southampton University to bring the site forward for obviously educational uses. That subsequently changed in terms of where they're going. But obviously, like I say, the criteria itself basically go through those constraints. And obviously, you've got the South Downs National Park it's adjacent to, and obviously the Winnell Moors Nature Reserve, the River Itchen SSI and SAC. So there's a whole range of issues that would need to be addressed through the plan application stage.
And the criteria you have?
That's right. There's a whole host of criteria that obviously would need to be addressed. Won't go through those in detail, but obviously they are listed in policy W10.
Okay. Does anybody wish to say anything on this? Sport Winchester, Mr. Craig. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you very much. Microphone on. First of all, if I could just respond a little bit in relation to the covenant that exists, or was put in place in 1902, sort of behind that site. I think really as a city council and as people, we've got to look at both the legality of the law, but also the spirit of the law and what the purpose was when that covenant was granted to make that land accessible and usable by the people of Winchester on a public basis. And it seems to be that it's somehow been hijacked to take over as a development opportunity, whereas in actual fact, if anything, if the building site itself there is not for use, it should be retained for sporting and recreational use. And I think it's within the power of the local plan to actually support that covenant rather than to actually take the legal advice that it's not the case. And in fact, I believe in 2010, the council did take some advice, CAT 3190, as a report which actually outlined the legal and practical difficulties of breaching the restrictive covenant. So unless something's changed in the law, I'm a little bit surprised that that's moved forward. So first of all, the point being is that we think this site should be retained for sporting and recreational use. It is part of a much larger River Park sporting area and actually acts as part of a green lung in the city of Winchester. Its location is also really important because actually it's at the centre of a sort of transport hub, and it's really quite accessible for everybody within Winchester district to actually get to that site using public transport and everything else. And that's quite an important consideration. Furthermore, there is a defined shortage of sporting facilities within the Winchester wider city area. And I have to differentiate here between the wider Winchester city area, and the Winchester district, because actually across the whole of the district, there's probably a reasonably good balance. But within Winchester city, specifically, there is a shortfall. And as there's a shortfall, one would actually look to retain the use of land for the purpose of sporting use. And we would recommend that that's very much the case. Furthermore, interesting, in the 2022 census statistics, 14% of the population of Winchester district identified as actually being disabled or having a disability. And actually the ease of access to sporting and good facilities is a real issue across the whole of the city, across the whole of the district, particularly for sporting use. And we believe that actually that site could be retained and used to fulfill some of the shortfalls that are going to be identified within the sporting pitch playing strategy report, which is currently being developed at this moment in time. And that's an important thing to bear in mind. And perhaps lastly, to us, it really seems that we have policies NE3, which is very strong on sort of trying to support and retain the use of sporting things. And to be quite frank, this drives sort of a cart and horses through this, and it's totally contravention of paragraph 7.26 and 7.29. And I think there's an opportunity here for the council to cooperate within the local plan to address this and put it back to prove the support that their policies within the plan can actually be met, and that actually there is a commitment to try and recover the shortfall that exists. And quite simply, we cannot be in a situation where we are taking on new land developments and just allocating the minimum land necessary to meet the sporting requirements of those developments. We should also actually be committing those land developments to recover the shortfall that has been identified within the open spaces plan, because that way, by the time we get to 2040, we could collectively say this is a successful plan and we've actually delivered and brought our standards up to the level that they should be. And that's really what we'd like to see within the plan. The local plan, generally speaking, is very good, and there's a huge amount of good work that's within it. But actually within the plan, by adopting the right standards and the right actions to take to recover that, we could actually make it a really great plan. And that's really what we're advocating. Now, for Sport Winchester, we speak on behalf of a wide variety of different sports clubs and organisations. We work very hard to get their information and input of what they would like to potentially see and we could do within the city. And there's no doubt about it that there is an opportunity here to do something here in the middle of the city. It doesn't take away the fact that the sports centre that was built out at Bar End, which is the new sports centre 4 years ago and open, is an excellent facility. There's no question about it. It really is. It was built on the top of 3 football pitches over there, but it's a great facility. But there is an actual need for more facility. The city grows, the city is in a healthy place, and we need to recognise that. And the city perhaps needs to also recognise that there are ways of managing that as a process without conflicting with any commercial contractual agreements that might exist with the operators of the sports centre. So for these reasons, we actually believe that the covenant issue should be re-examined and potentially supported rather than defeated, and that site should be designated for retention of sport and leisure as part of the recovery plan for the city. And thirdly, we should actually have a really good process to actually decide what should go on there that would actually meet the needs of the city. And we're quite prepared to sort of do some work on that to do that. So that's our sort of submission. Okay. But a lot of positivity on the plan, don't get me wrong, just we'd like to see these things incorporated. Thank you.
Okay. You heard what's been said.
Thank you. I think obviously, if I could draw your attention to policy W10, obviously it does talk in there about class ED, indoor sport and recreation. So it does allow.
It does allow it.
It does allow it. So obviously there is obviously it's positive in terms of what it can do. And obviously we've got the criteria in the policy about the proposals designed to complement and enhance the appearance of River Park, recreation ground, provide suitable gateway, etc. But obviously we must be clear about how much of this site, basically it's a PDL site, obviously the building is PDL. We're not allocating obviously the bowl centre and the little skate park, etc. So in terms of obviously what it could actually bring in terms of additional open space, it's very limited in terms of basically what it could actually bring if you were, say, for example, to demolish the building and do something else on the site. But that's our feeling.
But it's the point is it's not protecting the leisure centre use. No. That's the point that's being made.
And I think we're just being realistic that obviously the condition of the building, hence why the building wasn't refurbished, and hence why the council made a decision to build obviously the new sport and leisure park. They could have made the decision to redo it on the existing site, or the existing building, but they didn't. They made a decision to build a new sport and leisure centre, so that decision was made. So like I say, the building is there. Could obviously have some use come forward for it, but like I say, the building is quite dilapidated now. It's not in great condition.
Okay.
No, sorry, can I just start one point on that? It's interesting that we've actually advocated that the council incorporates the Sport England standards for space and space allocation within their planning. And one of the reasons behind that is they would actually advocate, I think it's 1.6 hectares of space for sport per 1,000 population, of which 1.2 is actually for playing fields, which means that 0.4 is actually the space for non-playing field facilities, such as sports halls and things like that. And that's why if you incorporate those accepted standards, we have a clear benchmark that we can measure across the whole of the plan, and that would be good for everybody because then we can see transparently what we're actually trying to achieve here. And Adrian Fox is absolutely right. The current facility is end of life. It's 50 years old. It's beyond its design date and obviously needs to go. But it doesn't mean to say that it cannot be replaced with something which is fit for purpose and it doesn't have to totally replicate exactly what was there at all. But thank you very much.
I've heard that. Are there any amendments on that policy? No. Yes. No. No. Yes, there is. Yes, in relation to heritage assets, the Abbey Gardens. Sorry, not Yeah, yeah. Got that. So Hyde Abbey Gateway.
Yeah, this was picking up, if
Yeah.
you recall, Mum, we had that letter or email in, so, but it was a point of clarification.
Yeah.
Historic Union, happy with that, just basically in terms of paragraph 12.106.
And then in terms of flood risk.
And in terms of flood risk, again, basically from the Environment Agency, again, obviously just directing people to obviously what you need to do. And then obviously the Southern Water comment about the sewer network capacity assessment, which they've made on similar sites.
Okay. Okay, I'll take a view on that. Could we move on, please, to policy SH4, Solent Business Park? It's allocated for high tech and business uses in EG uses. And indeed, it's the promoter who raises serious concerns over the deliverability of that within the planned period, which obviously is a matter for me. The promoter seeking flexibility for other uses. You've suggested a main modification. Could I ask you to introduce that, please?
Yes, certainly.
What number is it? I've got a horrible version here that is confusing me dreadfully because it's all on pages.
Right.
It's where?
And then 64. Page 75 the new.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So, following consideration of hearing statements and points made really through the plan process, we considered further the approach to this remaining parcel at Whiteley, and that's what main modification 64 is about. On reflection, we do think actually we should better reflect what we anticipate is deliverable on the site and will come forward. In the hearing statement, paragraph 1.83, we just outlined, for instance, a decision on the planning application that was taken on that site a few years ago.
Yeah.
Obviously, that application's lapsed and that's a planning application decision, but still that thinking still holds true in terms of looking at a flexible and deliverable mix of uses on that site that can support the vitality of the overall business park, but reflect the fact that it's not all necessarily offices. So, for instance, the uses that were included in the previously issued permission included a nursery, for instance, that clearly has some synergy with its location in the park. So the modifications there to really pick up on updating the policy, removing reference to 11,000 square meters of office floor space, being more accurate about what we're trying to achieve, which is the new paragraph to follow 13.35. So that's at the bottom of page 75 of the mods document. That's what we're looking to do, is compatible and complementary to the business park. And then over the pages is the main modification. And apologies, there is a typo in the document you have there actually, and we've got two provide fors, but I'll just talk you through it if I may, because there's a further change we've been reflecting upon. What we're trying to do here is achieve that flexible range of employment and other associated uses. What you have in front of you is a modification that has two provide fors. Well, forget the first one, forgive me. But if I read it out in total from there, and I'll say where the change is. So we're looking at provide for a range of business uses falling within use class, e.g. B2, B8 and other employment generated uses. In addition, a limited amount of appropriate, and then delete the word ancillary. This is for reasons I'll outline in a moment. Leave in the word commercial users, and then delete the words within the broader use class E. Now, our reason for saying that today at this point, I'm afraid, is further reflection on what we're actually looking to achieve.
Sorry. In addition, a limited amount of appropriate commercial uses
are also, and then goes to, are also supported subject to other policies in the plan if they contribute to the amenity, sustainability and vibrancy of the business park.
Okay.
And it's really, on reflection, we've thought, taking the nursery or other examples, there are likely to be other uses not limited to Class-E that would fall within that category. So we will need to work this and present it back to you, but obviously we needed to mention that at the start of this discussion. That's the modification as we are now promoting.
Okay, I understand. Let's park that a minute. Okay, and then the criteria for this policy. So it has a restriction on height, generally avoid being over 3 stories, 14 metres, and includes parkland, which as a minimum should constitute around 30% of the site area. Can you justify those? What's been said is surely that falls out of the design process, which we've spoken about at some length.
Yes, no, we sort of accept really where the promoter's coming from. These standards, if you like, come from the development brief that was prepared for the park as a whole. That included, for instance, an overall approach, master plan approach that delivered 40% of landscaping across the Solent 1 business park as it was then. 10% was structural, so that's in, and then the idea was remaining parcels picked up the remaining 30%. So there has been a process, a rationalisation of how this has been delivered, and that's where these standards have come from. To be perfectly honest, we have considered the potential, for instance, to moving those standards into the supporting text, for instance, as an indication of where we're coming from, but recognising that there is a design process to go through, and particular needs of particular proposals may slightly differ from those. For our part, I can just reiterate, we think that on balance, the current policy as Word talks about generally no more than 3 stories high and around 30% of the site area. That did not preclude that previous application from being permitted, despite that varying in some minor degrees from that. So on balance, that's where we're at present with those criteria.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody around the table wish to make comments on this? Mr. Benham?
Thank you, Mum. I suppose just starting with the use classes part of it. Obviously grateful to the local authority for engaging with us on that point. So for brevity now, I think it's probably best if you're happy to do this, we continue a bit of a conversation beyond, but in principle, I'm happy with what.
Okay, what does that mean in terms of deliverability?
Well, we are, well, it is a deliverable site, first and foremost. We are trying to, we're out talking to various different occupiers and trying to drum up interest in the land, which we have, as we've set out in our hearing statements and our previous representations on this. We've been acting on the site. The current owners of it bought it about 3 years ago. We've brought forward a couple of proposals over those times, which have fallen away for various reasons. But ultimately, it's a deliverable site. There is demand for a range of uses. Offices is not where the demand is, which is where the flexibility is.
But your
really
initial reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're on face value supportive of what is being said. Obviously, we've seen these main modifications. The additional bit that Mr. Ayling was just referring to is relatively new news, but it sounds good in principle.
Okay. And can I ask you to turn your attention to the design requirements in terms of height and the amount of open space? or landscaping?
Yes. So again, we've this is all set out really in our reps and in our hearing statement. We struggle really to understand why this is necessary, and why it's really justified. The hearing statements from the council seem to say because this is what we've always done, that's why we're still doing it. I don't accept that that's really the right way to look at it. A minimum of around 30% is what does that really mean? It's quite loose, and as we know, there's a history of applications on the site that didn't apply this anyway. So sort of ask the question, is it really necessary to have it if there's going to be this flexibility? The same point is relevant to the height point. We all accept that the business park is it's the last phase to come forward. There is an established character to the area, and clearly it's within a sort of highly landscaped setting. So I think other policies within the plan will be able to direct both us as applicant and the development management officers towards what an acceptable, what a well-designed scheme looks like, without these sort of, in my mind, slightly arbitrary figures inserted into policy. On final point on inserting it into the subtext, I'm not sure that's, again, I don't think that's necessary. I think language around what, generally speaking, what they are trying to achieve would be okay, but I would be concerned if you put 30% and the 40 million. Are you then introducing tests into the subtext, which the policy itself doesn't ask for?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I understand. Do you want to add anything to that?
Very briefly, I think if all I would differ from, I think, is that if the wording was put in the supporting text as a description and indication of the sort of approach the council was looking for, as long as it was done in the right way, it could form a useful basis for all parties to understand the sort of approach, the sort of outcomes we're after, without trying to get policy requirements in through the back door.
Okay, I hear what you say. Okay, thank you for that. Let's move on to Bishop's Waltham, Tollgate Sawmill, allocated for employment with limited market housing subject to viability, including the restoration of Tollgate House. So it's an extant allocation, hasn't come forward. What's the evidence that it will? There's evidence, I've read that there's no agent, that etc.
Yes,
tell me.
We're in a position where there was an agent at the start of this process, but going into Reg 19, we don't have a current agent on site. I think the only thing I would add to my hearing statement really is that, unlike the rolled forward allocation, we are broadening the range of uses that we are indicating would be acceptable on the site. We know that the practice in Bishop's Waltham is looking for a new premises, an alternative premises. We're certainly not telling the practice or anyone else this is the only location they could come to, but we think that this could help in terms of bringing that site forward. Otherwise, the position with the ownership and the deliverability of it is as per the hearing statement. But I have spoken to our environmental protection manager, who is involved in, we've been on, the council has been onto the site. If you visit, you'll see signs up warning trespassers and so on. Those ongoing issues about having an insecure site with close to an existing settlement are still with us, and we're still wrestling with that. And so it's in that context why we're remaining to promote this as an allocation in the plan.
Okay, can I ask you to look at that and give me some solid evidence that there's somebody who's going to take the site forward? Because I understand about the GP surgery, but if I haven't got evidence that somebody's going to take that site forward and there's massive interest, I have concerns.
Absolutely. We will continue to try to contact the site owner and update you with where we're at with that, but we may not be able to provide you with anything further than we've got.
Okay, what would be the implications if you couldn't?
Well, this is helpful. Thank you. Yes, I mean the site is it's an employment site allocated B2B8, and we have figures in our supply table for that use. In terms of our overall strategy, however, we're mindful of the fact there isn't a comparable alternative site in Bishop's Waltham for these uses. There's one other site in the Sheila that's been identified that is for those type of uses, much smaller site, and it's some way out in the parish. It's not adjacent to the Severn boundary, so we don't see it as a really credible one in, one out alternative way to deliver that level of development. We would in effect be looking at a lower overall quotient of allocated employment land to meet the needs if the site was to be removed for concerns over deliverability. We outlined before the extent to which we expect windfall to be a further mitigating factor there.
Okay, heard what you said. Thank you very much. Can we turn on to Morgan's Yard, please? Allocated for employment use, it's an existing employment site, plus housing, 80 units. What's the justification for the loss of the employment site space?
The allocation, sorry, the site came forward as an allocated site through the adopted local plan. That involved the removal of existing uses. It was a caravan sales and service site and a van site in particular. I think the process for delivering that previous local plan looked at the balance of uses and frankly the level of employment, the amount of jobs offered by a van storage site, which is a large part of their work, and considered that it was appropriate to go for a housing site at that location. The policy and indeed the application that has now received permission seeks the retention of a part of the site for employment purposes, and that's what we've gone for. That's what we've got now. Whilst discussing that, I'm just conscious that you previously asked with regards to the housing site about the delivery of that, just to say that this site is subject to contamination. We talked about the pre-commencement conditions on contamination and everything else for this site, just to say that the conditions relating to the remediation of land, so the contamination remediation strategy and the pre-commencement strategy, those conditions were both approved by the council on 23rd of May. So we've got progress there in terms of there's now those, I told you, I think last time with the housing component, they were in hand, they've now been permitted. So there is now a clear agreed way forward to deal with contamination on the site. And forgive me, there is a main modification 84 on this, which is the standard wording around potential infrastructure requirements with the resulting from our discussions with the Integrated Care Board. In this case, of course, if the current application is permitted, then that doesn't apply, but it runs with the policies, of course, and so should remain there until such time as it's delivered.
Okay, and okay, does anybody wish to say anything about that? Okay, I'll take that away. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to raise, please? Now, I'm concerned because we had a chap here from Sakenham Homes and he obviously had to leave. I'm going to...
I can help a little with that, I think. I think the gentleman you saw leave was actually an associate of for KW Forum.
This was Matt King, and he was with me, as it were.
Oh, I see. So Stakenham Homes, I thought he sat in that
No,
seat.
never arrived.
Fine, that's absolutely fine, because I was going to think about a way that I could deal with that, if that's okay. So it was your colleague who was there, and you're happy that?
Yes,
you
yeah,
dealt with all
we've
those
yeah, exactly that.
points?
We're
Okay.
content. Thank
Okay,
you.
that,
Thank
that's
you, Mark.
fine. Okay, now, so it's 2:10. This session is now closed. Thank you very much for all your contributions. Now to the council, I'm sorry that we've overrun. It was inevitable, and I could see that, hence we made the arrangements. We all need a break before we get on to carbon reduction. It's now 2:10. I'm going to suggest that we come back at 3 to have a proper to have a proper break. That session I would anticipate would be a lot shorter.
Yes, I agree with that.
A lot shorter. So we should 2 hours, do you think?
That's feasible, certainly.
2 hours.
2.5 minutes.
Yeah, let's come back. I'm just a little bit concerned about time. If we come back at 10:02.
It's fine.
So that we've just got a little bit more time if we need it. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you very much for your contributions. They've been very helpful. This session's now closed. If you open up. Oh, thank you. Harry Potter. Thank you. Yeah.